With thanks to Variety Cruises, a family company sailing since 1942, you have the chance to win a £10,000 7-night small boat cruise for two. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, you'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and explore Greece like never before. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christys. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christys tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Monday, the 15th of April.
To strike or not to strike, Israel weighs up whether to go big in its retaliation against Iran as allies warn against all-out war. Should Israel strike back?
As MPs prepare to vote on the Rwanda bill again today, leaked documents reveal Britain wants to replicate the scheme with countries like Botswana or even sunny Costa Rica.
And Trump on trial. Within hours, Donald Trump will become the first US president ever to face a criminal trial. His supporters argue he will not get a fair one in Democrats supporting Manhattan.
And news just in. A bishop and several worshippers have been viciously attacked in another stabbing rampage in Sydney, Australia. We'll have the latest on the ground. Now, we will, of course, get to Australia and the concerning news that is developing there. More information coming in all the time, really concerning stuff. But the top story in our menu is, of course, Israel, Iran, British involvement and what could happen next.
Yes, what choices do Israel have? Iran sent roughly 300 missiles. The intention, obviously, to cause as much harm as possible. Thankfully, no deaths as a result because of their defence system and also because their allies got involved to help defend them.
Not least the RAF, the American Air Force, but even Saudi Arabia joining the defence of Israel there. Really interesting stuff.
So I guess the question is, should Israel retaliate and what should that look like? There seem to be options whether to completely sit on their hands, not do anything, count this as a win. That's what David Cameron said.
Yeah.
Take this as a win. Don't escalate. This could turn into an all-out war. Others are saying, well, hang on, if this had happened to Britain, would we just stand back and not do anything in return?
But there are risks in every direction here. We can see that the oil price is currently stable. If there's a big retaliation, does this drag into a larger war? Does that affect our energy bills here in Britain? Does that send inflation on another spike upwards? Should it be the priority to keep things calm and stable, or to strike back hard?
Well, let us know what you think. gbnews.com/your say is how you can get in touch. Please do throughout the show. And, of course, and everything else we're talking about. Trump on trial, the shocking stabbing in Sydney, and, of course, the Rwanda bill too. Let us know your thoughts. But shall we get the headlines?
Good afternoon. The top stories this hour. Escalating tensions in the Middle East will be addressed by the Prime Minister in the Commons this afternoon. The Foreign Secretary has confirmed RAF jets shot down a number of Iranian drones and missiles after hundreds were fired at Israel at the weekend. Lord Cameron says the UK will now consider further sanctions against Tehran. The United Nations has warned the Middle East is on at the brink and is urging Israel not to retaliate. But the country's war cabinet is split on the timing and scale of any response. Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey says Israel has the right to defend itself.
We have an important role to play alongside allies, as we did over the weekend. It's defensive action, and it was in the face of an utterly unprecedented and unacceptable Iranian attack, direct from Iran as well as from militia groups in other countries.
534 people were intercepted in the English Channel yesterday, making it the highest number of crossings on a single day so far this year. It means the total number of small boat arrivals this year now stands at a provisional total of 6,265. It comes as the government's flagship Rwanda policy returns to Parliament, with MPs due to debate the latest amendments by peers. 3 people have died and another's in a critical condition following a car crash in North London. It happened near the Staples Corner retail park just before midnight yesterday. 5 men, all thought to be in their early 20s, were in one car. Police don't believe any other vehicles were involved in the incident. 3 people were pronounced dead at the scene and 2 others were taken to hospital. The 5th man's injuries are not life-threatening. A man has been arrested following reports of another stabbing in Sydney. A live stream of a sermon at the Christ Good Shepherd Church showed a bishop being targeted by a man before worshippers tackled the offender to the ground. It's not clear what he was armed with. New South Wales Police has confirmed those being treated suffered non-life-threatening injuries. Meanwhile, the father of the man who fatally stabbed 6 people at a shopping centre in Sydney has apologised for his son's actions. Joel Couchy killed 5 women and a male security guard on Saturday. Police say they're investigating whether he was specifically targeting women. They believe the 40-year-old suffered from schizophrenia and used drugs, including meth and psychedelics. Andrew Couchy says his son was a very sick boy.
I'm extremely sorry. I'm heartbroken for you. Look, this is so horrendous that I can't even explain it. You're trying to give you an intelligent conversation. I can't do it because I'm just devastated. I love my son. I made myself a servant to my son when I found out he had a mental illness. I became his servant. I did everything because I love that boy.
The first of 4 criminal trials against Donald Trump begins later today in New York. The former president has been charged in connection to a case involving a hush money payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels. He faces a maximum of 4 years in jail if convicted, but could avoid serving time and be fined instead. The trial is expected to last 6 to 8 weeks. Millions of people across the country are set to have access to new long-distance rail routes. Under new rail industry plans, open access services on 7 routes are being developed, aiming to boost connectivity, increase competition and reduce fares. York-based prospective open access company Grand Union Trains plans to launch services between London Euston and the city of Stirling in central Scotland from June next year. It's also been given the go-ahead to run trains between London Paddington and South West Wales. And universal credit will need to change to meet the challenges of an older and sicker population. That's according to a new report. The Resolution Foundation says the number of benefit claimants who are out of work due to ill health has almost doubled since 2013. The report says both the benefit system and the country have changed significantly since universal credit was introduced. The government recently announced changes to the credit scheme aimed at encouraging people with ill health to seek work. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 12, and let's start with that breaking news in the last half hour that a priest has been stabbed multiple times whilst delivering Mass at a church in a suburb of Sydney.
Well, joining us now with the details is our Home and Security editor, Mark White. What do we know? We've seen shocking footage of this vicious attack.
Yes, this is the Christ the Shepherd Church in Wakeley in Western Sydney, where this attack happened. It's 9 o'clock in the evening in Sydney at the moment. This happened at evening Mass at Bishop Murray Emmanuel was presiding over that Mass when video shows, and you can see a still image of the video there, a man who walks forward, then lunges at this priest, stabbing him in the face, and then multiple times, as then members of the congregation jump on top of this man to try and subdue him. The information that we've got at this early stage is that up to 4 people may have been stabbed. The police are saying that they have all sustained non-serious injuries. It's unclear what this individual had in his hand carrying out this stabbing. It looked to be a smallish item. It may have been a bladed item that he was carrying, but enough, whatever it was, it clearly inflicted some stab injuries. So up to 4 people within this church who were stabbed by whatever this man was carrying. He was arrested at the scene, is now in police custody as they try to determine the motivation for what was clearly a horrific attack.
Mark, it is shocking seeing the video. Of course, we've decided not to show the video in full, the stabbing and, frankly, the screaming. But, Mark, this comes just days after another attack in Sydney, another vicious stabbing attack. It's fairly unusual to see a stabbing followed by another stabbing like this. Do we know if there is any link between the two?
Yeah, I mean, this type of multiple stabbing is certainly unusual in Sydney. And, of course, people are reeling from what has happened just on Saturday there. Now to get the news of what is unfolding this evening. That stabbing, of course, at Bondi Junction, at the Westfield shopping centre there, in which this attacker with a knife managed to stab multiple people, killing 6 people, including a mother and her young baby daughter, who was stabbed but survived after surgery in hospital. Absolutely horrific. On that particular occasion, you saw in the news bulletin there the father of this man talking about how he had suffered from schizophrenia for a number of years, and you know, absolutely heartbroken and apologetic for what has happened here. The police, with regard to the Bondi Junction attack, said that they had known this individual. He'd never been arrested before, but is someone that they had come into contact with, and they are investigating whether indeed he had singled out women and other vulnerable people to attack. And that was borne out, I think, by the demographics of those killed: 5 women and 1 man.
Well, thank you very much indeed for bringing us what you know, and we'll bring any developments. We'll also be heading live over to Sydney to hear a Sydney perspective. But, Mark, let's turn your attention to the Middle East. What options does Israel have? The War Cabinet is meeting to discuss whether they retaliate, whether they attack, strike back Iran. What are their options on the table?
Well, that War Cabinet has just been reconvened, so they are discussing their options. I mean, what Israel says is that it will respond, but so far it's saying it will be at a time and of a method of its choosing. Clearly, international allies are saying to Israel, exercise restraint here because there is the real potential for this to escalate into a regional conflict. I mean, what Israel is saying in response to that is this was an attack by another state on the sovereign state of Israel. If it was 331 drones, missiles, including cruise and ballistic missiles, launched at a Western nation, they wouldn't be necessarily urging restraint, but certainly acknowledging the right of Israel to defend itself. So we await to really see what the War Cabinet will come up with in terms of the response. Iran, for its part, is saying that this operation is concluded, that they have sent their message to Israel in response to that strike on a consulate in Damascus on the 1st of April, in which a number of Iranian generals and diplomatic staff were killed. But they say that they will strike again and strike with a greater degree if Israel then retaliates and strikes them. So there is the potential for huge escalation here, but we just don't know yet until Israel decide on their plan of action.
A hugely tense situation. Well, Mark White, thank you very much for bringing us the very latest there, both from Sydney and from Israel.
Well, joining us now is the Director of Policy at the Counter-Extremism Group, Tom Wilson. Tom, thank you very much indeed. As Mark White was just explaining, the War Cabinet in Israel are meeting. They'll be deciding what to do. What do you suspect they will decide?
Well, it's impossible to know, and it may be that Israel simply decides to carry out another series of attacks targeting Iranian proxies or the IRGC and their infrastructure in places like Syria. Or it could be that they decide that since there's been a direct attack on Israeli territory, they will directly attack Iranian territory. I think for the Israelis, what they're going to be thinking about is how to establish and maintain deterrent to Iran, because although there has been conversations here about not escalating, I think Israel is very aware that ever since October the 7th, Iran has been escalating, because it's ultimately inconceivable that something like October the 7th and that massacre could have happened without Iranian support. And what we've seen from Western policy is an attempt for a number of years now, going back to Barack Obama's time as president, is attempts to essentially negotiate with, appease, moderate the Iranian regime have now failed. And so a policy of deterrent, of making Iran understand there's a very high cost to doing things like what they did the other evening, may be the best way that Israel can push back against the Iranian threat.
Of course, the attack was a failure. There were 99% of those 331 missiles and drones were downed by coalition forces, mainly Israel, but of course the Americans, the Brits, the Jordanians, the Saudis as well. Of course, the message from the United States, from the G7, from the UK is restrain, is one of restraint towards Israel. Frankly, the escalation here to state-on-state warfare would be incredibly destabilising for the whole world. What is the most restrained action that Israel could do that would also satisfy their legitimate need to retaliate?
I mean, they could carry out strikes against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, as they already have been doing, but that wouldn't stop the conflict from continuing. It's very clear that for years now, Iran has sought confrontation not only with Israel, but also with the US. And don't forget that US installations and US consulates in the Middle East have been targeted by Iran and its proxies. And I think, it's significant that Britain took part in the action over the weekend to try and repel the Iranian attacks because of the fact that we have also suffered at the hands of Iran. It's British troops who were being killed in Iraq and Afghanistan by Iranian-made roadside bombs. Our embassy in Tehran was stormed by the Iranians some years ago. And we also, of course, have pro-Iranian extremist groups operating here in the UK. We had, of course, the Al-Quds Day march in London only the other week, where Hezbollah flags are usually seen flying. They weren't flying this time because Hezbollah is now proscribed, but I don't think that's because everybody on the march has suddenly stopped supporting Hezbollah.
Well, Tom, it's interesting you mentioned that was going to be my next question. What are the implications on our domestic security? How will Iran be seeking to behave? Will they be funding terrorist activities in this country? I know that Israel are calling on the UK government to prescribe the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps here as a terrorist organisation. What are the implications for the average Brit's safety?
Well, so far, Iran has obviously been very careful not to target the British public, but for Iranian dissidents who live here in Britain, I think that this must be a very frightening time because there are a series of organisations and networks that are completely aligned with the Iranian regime. The degree to which they're being directed by the IRGC, we can't know. But nevertheless, the general atmosphere of extremism, of incitement, of support for terrorism, at least ideologically, is encouraged by many of these different groups. And in the UK, we need to be far more mindful of how a regime that is fundamentally hostile to the West, to Western democracy and to Britain, how we are acting to make sure that they don't continue to incite and have a divisive influence on the situation between communities here in the UK. And that should be the first thing that we're trying to do. As you mentioned, prescribing the IRGC would be one very obvious way to do that. But I also think that taking measures to disrupt various extremist Islamist groups backed by Iran in the UK would also be an important policy for the UK to pursue.
Well, we are, of course, expecting a statement from the Prime Minister in the House of Commons a little bit later this afternoon, which may well go as far as prescribing the IRGC and perhaps even more sanctions. It's hard to imagine what more sanctions we can place upon Iran at this stage. But Tom Wilson, Director of Policy at the Counter-Extremism Group, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yes, it will be very interesting to see what the Prime Minister has to say, whether there are more efforts that can be made to sanction Iran. What exactly is the tone he's going to adopt when it comes to defence of Israel and our allyship with that state?
Listening to David Cameron this morning, he was out and about saying it's very clear who the bad guys are in the Middle East, that Iran is the enemy, Israel is an ally. Actually, frankly, Saudi Arabia, strong ally over the weekend as well. But the question is, what is in Britain's national interest? We know how much destabilised countries, particularly destabilised oil-producing countries, can rock this country, can rock our energy bills, can rock our general inflation rate, can rock our mortgage rates even. And there's got to be an eye on stability and economic security here for us at home.
But have we failed?
As well as justice.
Yep, completely. But have we failed to hold Iran to account, to accept the threat from Iran? Have we appeased Iran? And when I say we, I mainly mean Western countries, our country, the United States. Have we? Tom Wilson's suggesting that we have for many years. Was that a mistake?
But it's been something
so emboldened
countries have been
act
juggling.
in this way?
Because, of course, it was the Obama administration that initially developed the Iran nuclear deal. This was to free up frozen assets for Iran in return for their stopping their nuclear programme. Now, of course, Trump reversed that. Biden put it back into place. This is a question that regimes have been grappling with for a long, long time. How do you contain Iran? Because it's a large country, it's a populous country, it's a wealthy country, and how do you contain that threat outside of a full-scale war? I don't think anyone wants to see a West versus Iran war. We saw the sort of disasters that we've seen in large-scale wars in that part of the world in the past.
Well, let us know what you think of it all. Should Israel strike back? To what extent? And would you be comfortable seeing the United States and Britain following in that pursuit. But still to come. MPs will vote on the Rwanda bill again today. This comes after revelations the government has held talks with other countries to replicate the Rwanda deportation scheme, including even sunny Costa Rica, although it is sometimes rainy in Costa Rica.
It's a nice holiday destination nonetheless.
Good afternoon, Britain. We're on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Do you mind if I ask you a little bit about Sebastian? It really amazes me how a mother who can lose a child in such a shocking and unexpected way, so little, so precious, can then turn that grief into something so positive. How did you find the strength to get up, get a camera crew, as you say, travel to the other side of the world and investigate all of this?
I was angry at Sebastian for dying. You know, you feel like saying, God, 32 years later, and I can still get very, very upset about it. I was angry that something that while he was born and lived with me and slept and then died, they were actively campaigning in New Zealand to try and stop this happening because they had a very high cot death rate there. They had the lady, the Anne Diamond, if you like, of New Zealand, a television presenter called Judy Bailey, went on telly every night and said, if you're just about to put your baby down to sleep, put him on his or her back, not the tummy, and this will help. And their cot death rate plummeted. And I went out to New Zealand and met her, and it was anger that drove me to come back and demand that we have the same advert here, the same campaign. And of course, I got all this complete nonsense from the Department of Health saying, you know, oh, young mothers do not watch television, I was told. In other words, while New Zealand mums were being told how to save their babies' lives, we actively denied British mums that advice during the time that Sebastian and others were dying.
And the other point, I suppose, to make is it's helpful to educate all generations, because when I had my babies, my mum would say, he's not settling, just stick him on his tummy, he'll be much happier. That's what we did with you. And we had to say, well, things have changed, and, you know, but it's about educating everybody, because it's not just the mums that get their hands on the babies.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 24 minutes past 12. Now, the Rwanda standoff resumes this week as the government's controversial bill returns to the House of Commons. This amid reports the UK has held talks with other countries to replicate the scheme.
Yes, including countries like Armenia, the Ivory Coast, Costa Rica and Botswana. Now, this comes as yesterday saw the single biggest daily total number of channel crossings so far this year. How many times have we had to read that one out?
It's a common refrain, isn't it?
Common refrain. 534 migrants arrived illegally in the UK in just one day.
Well, let's get the very latest now with our political editor, Christopher Hope, who joins us live from Downing Street. Now, Christopher, I know you'll have been speaking with the Prime Minister's official spokesman earlier this afternoon, but frankly, these new numbers of yet another record day across the Channel, it puts into perspective how much this illegal migration issue is an issue for the government, how much is riding on this.
Yeah, morning, Tom. Morning, Emily. That's right. It's almost as though the people traffickers are trying to taunt the government by pushing across 534 people that have been small boats. It's over the weekend. We know from our reporting by our colleague Mark White, who's been amongst the people traffickers, how they do try and coordinate it, and they send a lot over at once, and then they send a few over, and they are very, very clever how they do it and how they play cat and mouse with those border force vessels. And it is, the timing couldn't be worse, or perhaps better maybe for the government. It certainly highlights a problem. It will show Tory MPs why they must try and push through and overturn these 7 amendments today in the House of Lords to the Safety of Rwanda bill. We fully expect that to happen, by the way. There might be the odd rebellion maybe from Sir Robert Buckland, the former Attorney General. Back to the Lords tomorrow, and then back on Wednesday for the Commons to reassert their primacy in Parliament. And then, as I've been saying for weeks now, I expect this to be law on Thursday. If that doesn't happen, well, we'll wait and see. I've been talking to a peer just now over in Parliament. He thinks that Mr Sunak, I mean, he says this, he has no authority on it, that he could call an election to force it through. Now, no one thinks that with the Tories 25 points behind in the polls, but it just shows how febrile Parliament is, that this could be a big moment again this week for this government trying to get through a policy which they say will ensure that it breaks the business model. We saw over the weekend that it's going to cost £5 billion to send 30,000 people to Rwanda in the first 5 years of the scheme. Of course, the government would say that's quite a good value, given they're spending nearly £5 billion a year already on hotels to house people arriving here and claiming asylum. So the battle carries on this week.
And Christopher, have you heard any more about the idea that Home Office officials are looking at other countries, including Costa Rica, to replicate this scheme?
I'll be able to update you more in an hour's time, Emily. The lobby meeting, unusually, was evacuated shortly after it started, so it's still ongoing at the moment, and because of that I can't talk about what's being said in the meeting. So I'll get back to you on that. But certainly we heard reporting over the weekend, didn't we, in the Times, that Costa Rica, Armenia, Ivory Coast and Botswana could all sign up and try and help the UK with this model of breaking, as they see it, the people trafficking model. We should remind viewers, of course, that the Labour Party will axe this scheme even if it's shown to be working. So the race is on for this government to get these flights off, ensure that the courts don't try and frustrate them again if it becomes law, as we expect on Thursday, and get these flights taking off. And then a challenge to Labour: will you axe a scheme that's working?
It's really, really interesting stuff there, Chris. We will be back to you, of course, when that lobby meeting finishes. Curious evacuation procedure. Yeah. I'm looking forward to hear more about that. But on the House of Lords, because, of course, this is all part of that famous parliamentary ping-pong, Commons, the Lords, the Commons, the Lords. If the Commons passes this today, is it your understanding that the Lords is willing to let it through tomorrow? Or will there yet be more amendments added to it and we start the rigmarole all over again?
I think, Tom, no more amendments. I fully expect the Lords to return it to the Commons tomorrow when they vote on to reassert their 7 changes to the Safety of Rwanda bill. I think on Wednesday is the big day. That's the day when I expect the Commons to vote for a 3rd time to overrule the House of Lords. And whips tell me they expect the Lords on Wednesday to fold and this bill to become law on Thursday. Wow. That's how they think it's going to happen, but the Lords, of course, the government hasn't got a majority there. It may not happen, but that's what everyone's expecting over in Parliament.
Well, there's the prediction from Christopher Hope. We await to see the eventuality, but thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope, there outside Downing Street for us.
Made a note of that. Law by Thursday. But my goodness, how many road bumps has this legislation found? It almost won't be able to believe it.
Also, Christopher's reminding us what the Labour Party have said, that they would get rid of this scheme even if it seemed to work. I'm not sure whether they would, if it was working. They'd be mad to get rid of it if it was working.
Especially if this isn't just a Rwanda scheme, because we keep talking about this as if this is the Rwanda scheme, it's only about Rwanda. It's not. It's about having somewhere to deport people who we currently can't deport from the United Kingdom. And we saw how successful it was with Albanian migrants coming across. As soon as we had a returns agreement with Albania, we were able to get the people stop coming, we were able to deport them, and then new ones stopped coming across. Illegal migration fell by a third.
Although Mark did point out that a lot of them actually were just coming by lorry instead.
That is true, but as soon as they're across and picked up, they can then be sent back.
Picked up.
Now, we can do that with a country we have an agreement with. For the countries we don't have agreements with, we need third countries That's where Rwanda comes in. And if it's not just Rwanda, if it's Costa Rica as well and Botswana and so many other places, suddenly this starts to look like a really viable scheme of not just deterrence, but of deportation.
Then in which case you'd be mad as a new government to get rid of a policy that's working. But there you go, let us know your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say is the way to get in touch. But on the way, we'll be discussing how a St George's Society is disbanding after discovering it can't attract any new members. Sad stuff. We'll find out the story. Should we get your headlines?
Emily, thank you. The top stories this hour. Escalating tensions in the Middle East will be addressed by the Prime Minister in the Commons this afternoon. The Foreign Secretary has confirmed RAF jets shot down a number of Iranian drones and missiles after hundreds were fired at Israel at the weekend. Lord Cameron says the UK will now consider further sanctions against Tehran. The United Nations has warned the Middle East is on the brink and is urging Israel not to retaliate. But the country's war cabinet is split on the timing and scale of any response. 534 people were intercepted in the English Channel yesterday, making it the highest number of crossings in a single day so far this year. It means the total number of small boat arrivals this year now stands at a provisional total of 6,265. It comes as the government's flagship Rwanda policy returns to Parliament, with MPs due to debate the latest amendments by peers. 3 people have died and another's in a critical condition following a car crash in North London. It happened near the Staples Corner retail park just before midnight. 5 men, all thought to be in their early 20s, were in one car. Police do not believe any other vehicles were involved in the incident. And the father of the man who fatally stabbed 6 people at a shopping centre in Sydney on Saturday has apologised for his son's actions. Joel Couchy killed 5 women and a male security guard. Police say they're investigating whether he was specifically targeting women. They believe the 40-year-old suffered from schizophrenia and used drugs, including meth and psychedelics. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, I'm Jules Buckley. Eastbound side of the M8, Glasgow Airport Junction 28 to Paisley at 27 is struggling. The outside lane is blocked at the scene of an accident. There's one as well around Blackburn. That means 2 lanes shut on the westbound M65. A slow-going junction 4 to 3. Between Wales and England, the M48 Severn Bridge remains closed both ways due to strong winds. Somerset northbound M5 at Bridgewater South 24 lanes shut in queues. A condition is causing delays. Now, the southbound M1 is blocked at junction 6A for the M25, down towards Brickett Wood at junction 6 and queuing back to Hemel Hempstead at 7. That's at the scene of a collision. And a 4-mile queue anti-clock for the M25 before junction 27. A collision there means a lane closure in place. And that's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The perception of a crime being committed is not based on whether that person intended to commit a crime or not, but whether the victim, in inverted commas, or anybody else for that matter who happened to hear whatever was said, determines that it was motivated by malice or ill will. Most of these things come out in heated exchanges or in, very casual exchanges. And then somebody says, oh, I'm offended or I'm hurt or I'm whatever because this was clearly malicious and it's against me as a black person or a transgender or sexuality, whatever it might be. And somebody says, I perceive this to be motivated by hate. Now, at that point, what is the reasonable test that anybody could apply as to what was in somebody's mind at the time. You don't know what I'm thinking now. I don't know what you're thinking now. Why is it that a crime can be committed on the basis of what somebody is alleged to be thinking?
Well, that's also how discrimination often works, because people have worked out these days that saying something or sending an email like one I received some years ago that said, let's go round her place with pickaxe handles and balaclavas and see what we can do. Now, that's an email that was sent about me. People have worked out that you don't do that. But from the circumstance of what happens, if racial taunts were being shouted, if taunts about someone's protected characteristic were being shouted in the run-up to what then happened, it would be pretty obvious that that was a hate crime.
But we know, for example, that street preachers have been arrested merely for quoting the Bible and without actually intending, anything beyond that.
Right, well, you've been getting in touch. It's 12:37, by the way, on two major talking points today, whether Israel should strike back against Iran and whether other countries, not separate from Rwanda, including Costa Rica, might be a destination for channel migrants. Well, the government is apparently considering it.
I'm not sure that Costa Rica would be the biggest deterrent in the world. I mean, people pay a lot of money to go there on swanky holidays.
Well, Anton says, no, don't ruin Costa Rica, one of the most beautiful countries in the world. David says if Botswana is another destination, he's happy to do a recce and a safety report on the conditions. A one-way ticket, please. So David would like to go to Botswana.
John says, instead of us having to pay the costs for immigration, why don't we just return them to France? This could be done legally without any cost to us. Well, John, I'm afraid the French would have to agree. That's the problem with all of these things.
Chances of that happening.
We were successful with Albania. We signed a treaty. We could send people back to Albania. The whole point about Rwanda, Botswana, Costa Rica, any of these other countries is so we can send someone and they can agree to take them. Because so far the French have just refused to sign any sort of returns agreement with us.
Don't forget Armenia, too.
Yes.
But on the issue of Israel and Iran, Andy says Israel should strike once. That would be a brilliant example of Israeli capability and be popular with innocent Iranians. Yes, it is worth mentioning that there are a lot of Iranians who do not support the current regime, that's for sure.
And it is such a tough one, of course, because the Iran attack failed. The question is now, what does Israel do in return? And what does prevent a wider war that creates an incredibly difficult and unstable situation across the world, economically and with regard to security as well? Can Israel strike in a controlled way? And if Andy says Israel striking once, what would Iran do in return? Would they send another barrage of missiles? And would more of our RAF jets be scrambled to take some of those missiles down?
Should Israel take this as a win, that Iran was not successful, and perhaps just strike the drone factories?
It's an interesting point. Wendy says, I don't believe in any fighting, as it's always the innocents who suffer. But Hamas are nothing but bullies and need to be dealt with. If Israel don't fight back, they'll suffer even more.
Yeah, and Tim says, I think we must take action now, or we live with this bully rogue dictatorship calling the shots for the rest of time. Better to take action now before it realises any form of nuclear capability, assuming it hasn't already. Well, there you go, strong stuff from Tim.
Well, Maureen says, I hope we keep a safe distance from the Israel-Gaza-Iran war. Goodness me, it was an Israel-Hamas war. Now we're throwing Iran in there too. It's too easy to get involved in trouble and very hard to extricate ourselves. And that's
a hugely popular view. Absolutely, let's stay out of it as much as possible.
But
it's a view.
Can we stay out of it when, we're buying oil from that region? This affects our heating bills. This affects the rate of inflation. This affects interest rates. It affects everything in the global economy. It's such a tough one.
And, of course, we see a lot of pro-Iranian activity in this country, too. So can we really stay out of it? But keep your views coming in. gbnews.com/your say. Shall we move on?
Let's move on, because there's an interesting point that's coming up next week, and it's something that perhaps we don't talk about enough. That is, of course, St George's Day here in England. And a branch of the Royal Society of St George has announced that it's disbanding after it can't attract any new members. Shocking story in the lead-up to this year's St George's Day.
Yes, the president of the Leicestershire Society says changing values as well as demographics in the area are making it simply too hard for the society to carry on. Our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, has this GB News exclusive.
In every corner of the world, people celebrate English tradition and values as members of the Royal Society of St George. Yet here in England, branches are closing as membership dwindles.
I feel that in this country, St George is all but dead and buried.
Until recently, Stephen Warden from Wigston was president of the Leicestershire branch. Despite spending £1,500 of his own money advertising, he couldn't find enough members to keep it running.
I did everything humanly possible to get new members into the branch from the local environment, but they were just not interested in joining.
He thinks changing demographics and declining interest in the society's values contributed to disappearing membership. But he also blames political leadership at national and local levels. Stephen claims his proposal for a St George's Day parade was repeatedly rejected by Leicester City Council over 10 years. A celebration is planned for St George's Day, but like most cities and towns, no parade will pass through the streets. A Leicester City Council spokesperson said, "Leicester's annual celebrations of St George's Day have been organised and funded by the City Council for many decades, and they remain an important part of the city's festival calendar." Some in Leicester say they would like to see more done to celebrate England's patron saint.
I think it's a sign of patriotism. I think it helps the country. We celebrate a lot of religious festivals here.
People forget, I think, what is important to England.
Maybe it's been sort of jumped onto with the wrong crowd, but I think nowadays it's just completely different.
The Royal Society of St George has 5,000 members worldwide. It's non-political, open to all faiths and backgrounds, but is fiercely patriotic, promoting Englishness and values like free speech and tolerance. Nick Dutt is the Society's chairman.
Patriotism has been linked to nationalism, which are two very different things. We're a patriotic society. If you say in Scotland and Ireland, Wales, you're a patriot, no one thinks an eye. In England, people should take a step back. And that is a challenge. It's how we try and change that.
Back in Wigston, St George's Cross flies above Stephen's home.
It makes me feel good because I know at least I've not forgotten St George if everybody else has.
Even though his branch is gone, he's still a member of the society. He can't turn his back on St George. Will Hollis, GB News in Leicester.
Public holiday. It's got to be.
No.
It's got to be.
I don't
Another
know.
bank holiday, why not?
I don't like bank holidays.
Why not?
I don't think they're good for the economy.
OK, all right. They can be sometimes good.
I think it should be a day that we sort of respect
miserable,
more and
Tom.
mark more. But I don't think it's good to say just an extra day where literally no one goes to work, where everything shuts down, where business slows off.
Well, hang on. Hospitality very much stays open. Lots of people continue to do their jobs. It's just the boring office workers who don't have to go in.
There was an economic study a few years ago that showed the billions we lose for every bank holiday. In fact, having a bank holiday for... I don't think we shouldn't have had one, by the way, but having a bank holiday for the coronation last year or 2 years ago...
You know, the price of everything and the value of nothing, Tom.
Well, I mean, you
can you imagine what it would do for patriotism? We have problems in this country with people not believing in Britain, believing in England. We need people to get excited about traditions, bring people together to celebrate what it means to be English.
I think we can do better than saying have a day off work. I think we can do better
Go to work and have a party.
The innate patriotism, particularly of the English. And I think English people don't get enough opportunity to be patriotic about the 1,000+ years of history that this polity has enjoyed. I think very often
this little
other
piece
parts,
of land.
This earth, this realm, this England.
Yes.
Yes, no, the game's afoot. Follow your spirit and upon this charge.
Let us know what you think.
Harry, England and St George.
I want to know what our viewers and listeners are thinking at home. Do you think it is time for St George's Day to be celebrated with a public holiday?
Emily, do you know who wanted to make it?
We could get rid of one of the others.
Oh, I'd like that. Yes, let's abolish May Day and replace it with St George's Day. That I can absolutely approve of.
OK, well, let us know what you think. Do you think there should be a public holiday? gbnews.com/yoursay. We'll read out some of your views later on the show. But coming up, we're heading straight to New York, where Donald Trump will become the first president to ever go on a criminal trial. We'll bring you the latest.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Cold winds for most of us today. Those cold winds bring plenty of showers, but there will be some bright spells in between. Chance of rainbows in places. We've seen a cold front move across the country overnight. That's clearing the southeast late morning, and once that clears, we're into this cold airflow from the northwest. Gusty wind could cause some issues in one or two spots. 50-mile-per-hour gusts here and there. But that wind also bringing plenty of showers. The showers lively in places, hail and thunder, particularly towards the northeast of the UK. In between, a few sunny spells, although it's not going to feel warm in that wind. Highs of 11 to 13 Celsius in the south, 8 to 11 in the north. Through the evening and overnight, we'll see further showers coming through, but eventually there'll be longer, drier and clearer spells developing, and with lighter winds also developing. Well, temperatures will dip into the mid-single figures, perhaps towards northwestern parts, the low single figures, so a touch of ground frost possible as we start off Tuesday. And Tuesday begins with further cloud and showers for eastern parts in particular, one or two showers further west, developing as the day goes on. But all in all, fewer showers compared with today, a better chance of some sunshine in between, lighter winds, and as a result, well, it's going to feel marginally less cold.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Now, in the break, I looked at the cost of a bank holiday.
Of course you did.
The last time economists looked at it, it was 2010.
Yeah.
I ran the numbers through an inflation calculator, worked out the cost to have an extra bank holiday today in 2024, £4.3 billion. So the question is, what do we cut in order to have that bank holiday? The NHS, pensions,
the answer to that question is, Tom, not everything is about money. Thank you, JRM, for that comment.
Is that Jacob Rees-Mogg? I'd be surprised.
It might be Jacob Rees-Mogg on the old Your Say, gbnews.com/Your Say, JRM.
Well, shall we jump across from England, or indeed Turkey, if you want to be pedantic about St George, to the United States of America? Because Donald Trump has become the first former US president to stand trial on criminal charges today, as his case involving hush money payments begins in New York.
Yes, in the unprecedented trial, he is accused of falsifying business records to disguise a payment made to Stormy Daniels shortly before the 2016 election.
Well, this could be the first of 4 criminal prosecutions against Trump to go on trial this year. This as he runs for a second term at the White House.
So, joining us now is the chair of Republicans Overseas, Greg Swenson. Greg, the trial begins today. We shall see live footage of Donald Trump as he attends. I understand this is all going to be about the selection of the jury today and perhaps for the next few days. How important is this issue of jury selection for this case?
Yeah, I think it's really challenging for the president's case because it's in New York City, which is very hostile to President Trump. And Biden, the jury pool is 88% Democrat, but they're particularly hostile to President Trump in New York. And you even saw that in the campaign that Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor, ran to win election. His central theme of his campaign was get Trump. So this is a hostile jury pool, which makes it, I would think, pretty likely that there'll be at least one, but probably several convictions. And then the question is, does it help or hurt the president politically? I think the cynicism of this and the absolute absurdity of this case will actually help him in the long run.
And that's an interesting point, because unlike some of the other cases that we've seen, this isn't to do with sort of his role as president or what was proper or improper, nothing at all touching on January the 6th even. This is all about his personal conduct.
That's right. And that's why I think the voters will look at this as particularly reckless or a real weaponization of the justice system. It also helps President Trump that this is the first of the 4 indictments to go to trial. That actually helps him because it's the weakest of the cases. It's the most ridiculous of the cases. And again, I think that will help the president. I knew it would help him in the primaries, in the nomination process, and it surely did. It was a 30-point swing when the announcement came last year, and it basically ended the Republican nomination process. And Trump, obviously is clearly on the path to the nomination. But this might ultimately help him in the general election too, because it'll make voters really skeptical of the subsequent trials that are coming up, possibly one before the presidential election. But
Greg, do we have polling to back that up? Do we know what proportion of the American people believe that this is a weaponization of the justice system?
No, it's a great question. I don't know the numbers specifically on that, but I think what you saw in the Republican primaries is it clearly helped him. Again, he had a 30-point swing, very similar to the raid on Mar-a-Lago back in the summer of 22, when he went up 30 points, or there was a 30-point swing between the president and Governor Ron DeSantis. So, look, I'm not sure what the numbers are overall, and I think you will see even some Republicans that will not vote for him if there's a felony conviction on any of these. But that could change also, and you're seeing it in the polls recently, where he's doing very well and he's leading both overall as well as in the swing states.
Perhaps this would be very different if there was only one indictment. If there was only one case against Donald Trump, people might think, oh my goodness, might he have done something really quite wrong here? But given that there are so many different cases from so many different angles, it almost looks like a sort of establishment get Trump operation.
Oh, surely it is, Tom. I mean, if you look at the fact that most of these cases are real legal stretches and this case in particular should not have been brought. So I think that's a real challenge. And all of the cases are being orchestrated by progressive left prosecutors. And even this case in New York, not only Alvin Bragg, but the judge, Juan Merchan, is clearly a progressive left. So I'm not sure he's going to cut any breaks for President Trump in the trial, but I think that the voters will see through this ultimately.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Greg Swenson, chair of Republicans Overseas. We're going to be live in New York throughout the show as the trial begins. The jury selection today, it could go on for weeks, months.
Could go on for months, and it could take up a huge amount of the former president's time. 4 days a week he could be required to be in court.
That's part of the plan.
Well, my goodness, I suppose you could argue that that's trying to take him away from campaigning, but frankly, might it backfire? Or is there no smoke without fire? That's the gamble.
Yes, also a question of whether he can have a fair trial in Manhattan. Let us know your thoughts. But coming up, we're going to have all the latest on the horrific church stabbing in Australia, in Sydney, and we'll be debating how Israel should retaliate, should they retaliate, to an unprecedented attack from Iran. This is Good Afternoon, Britain.
brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, welcome to the Met Office weather forecast. It's going to be a blustery afternoon with further heavy showers coming through. They do ease later on with the chance of clear spells developing overnight, but generally low pressure is in charge of our forecast for the rest of the day. Low pressure sitting in the North Sea, bringing a gusty and cold northwesterly wind with it. These showers are going to be lively where they occur. Hail and thunder a possibility, but they do tend to ease overnight with clear spells developing. The showers becoming more confined to eastern parts along with the gusty wind, and with plenty of clear spells towards western and northwestern parts, temperatures will dip into the mid-single figures, perhaps a bit lower in one or two shelter spots. So a touch of ground frost here and there as we begin Tuesday, but otherwise plenty of bright weather first thing. Still be some cloud and showers along the east coast, and further showers will bubble up as the day gets going elsewhere. But there'll be fewer showers and there'll be more sunshine compared with today, with temperatures responding a little better. 14, perhaps 15 in the south, 11 or 12 further north, and with lighter winds feeling more pleasant. Wednesday starts off with a frost in places, clear spells first thing. Plenty of sunshine through the morning though, although there will be some cloudier skies returning to Northern Ireland later and a few showers elsewhere. All in all, it's looking like an improved picture as we end the week. Higher pressure, drier weather.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Don't miss your chance to win our biggest prize so far. There's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
TfL bosses have come under fire after banning an advert. Oh, God. They've banned an advert for a comedy show because it had a hot dog on it, because that supposedly promotes obesity.
The comedian Ed Gamble has swapped the image of the fast food favourite in favour of a cucumber instead. And there's the cucumber on the plate.
So is the UK turning into a nanny state? Let's talk to former presenter of Fat Families, Steve Miller, and nutritionist Olivia Parry. Good to see you both this morning. Olivia, it's a comedy show. He's not promoting eating hot dogs, is he? Is this just a load of nonsense?
The thing is, we have a huge problem with overweight and obesity in this country. We're fourth in Europe. It's big business. Advertising for food companies is big business. They make so much money. You just have to switch on primetime TV to watch, food after food advertisements. And it's for the youngsters as well, who don't have the nutritional education. We're not taught cookery in school anymore. People go to college and to university, they don't know how to cook.
But
and it leads
forgive me for jumping in, Olivia. Forgive me for jumping in, but the whole point with this is it's an advert for a comedy show.
Yes, I know, but this is a wider issue.
I think it's a load of old tosh, to be quite honest with you. It's a hot dog. In fact, I wish they'd have put onions on the hot dog. A bit of what you fancy won't hurt you. You should eat 80-20 anyway. We talk about a nanny state. I actually think, arguably, we're becoming an authoritarian state. Opinions banned. Comedy banned. The England flag banned. It's like we've got to wear a virtual muzzle.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Monday, the 15th of April.
In a moment, we'll be crossing over to Sydney, where a bishop and several worshippers have been viciously attacked in another stabbing rampage. Serious stuff.
And to strike or not to strike, Israel weighs up whether to go big in its retaliation against Iran, as allies warn against all-out war. Should Israel strike back?
As MPs prepare to vote on the Rwanda bill again today, leaked documents reveal Britain wants to replicate the scheme with countries like Botswana and even sunny Costa Rica.
And we're looking at live pictures here from New York. Within hours, Donald Trump will become the first US president ever to face a criminal trial. His supporters argue he will not get a fair one in Democrat-supporting Manhattan. We'll bring you pictures as we get them.
Now, it's not one of the largest issues facing the world this afternoon, but it's the one that's got the inbox the most excited, perhaps. And that's this question of St George's Day. We've seen a report from our West Midlands correspondent saying that there's a St George's Society that's had to close down, not enough interest in this. Emily, you had an idea.
I did. Public holiday. Public holiday for St George's Day. Why on earth not?
Because Jeremy Corbyn proposed it in his 2017 manifesto.
And he was right to do so, you know?
It was wrong. It's another day off. It would cost £4.3 billion to the economy.
You have absolutely no idea how much it would cost.
I have an alternative plan.
He put that in his inflation calculator and thinks it's gospel.
I have an alternative plan. We have a terrible situation in terms of bank holidays at the moment.
I suggested
It's lopsided.
that.
We have 2 bank holidays in May. Get rid of one of them.
I suggested that. And I'm happy with that. I suggested that. And then you jumped on board with it.
Let's rewind the tape, Your Honour.
We will rewind
Your
it.
Honour,
We'll get the clip.
I request the transcript.
And our viewers will remember that I initially said, why not just get rid of the May bank holiday?
I think you're
and then you can
misremembering
have
that, Emily.
St George's Day. Anyway, Matthew says Emily for Prime Minister. Bank holiday for St George's Day.
Whereas Margaret, June and Alan and Kevin all agree with me that we should abolish May Day, a socialist holiday, and replace it with St George's Day, a proper patriotic one. Cancel May Day, replace with St George's Day. Kevin says, great idea. Do away with one of the May bank holidays. Why do we have 2 bank holidays in May? It's ridiculous. Get rid of one of them.
I've never heard someone speak so miserably about the concept of bank holidays. We really don't have that many. We really do not have that many.
Oh, just have half the year off. Why not?
I'll keep your views coming in. I particularly like the ones that say, I agree wholeheartedly with Emily.
Yes, there are a lot. Matthew
disagree.
says Emily for Prime Minister,
Yeah,
even.
exactly. It's rather nice, isn't it? gbnews.com/your say. Get in touch. But let's get your headlines.
Good afternoon. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Escalating tensions in the Middle East will be addressed by the Prime Minister in the Commons this afternoon. The Foreign Secretary has confirmed RAF jets shot down a number of Iranian drones and missiles after hundreds were fired at Israel at the weekend. Lord Cameron says the UK will now consider further sanctions against Tehran. The United Nations has warned the Middle East is on the brink and is urging Israel not to retaliate. But the country's war cabinet is split on the timing and scale of any response. Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey says Israel has the right to defend itself.
We have an important role to play alongside allies, as we did over the weekend. It's defensive action, and it was in the face of an utterly unprecedented and unacceptable Iranian attack, direct from Iran as well as from militia groups in other countries.
534 people were intercepted in the English Channel yesterday, making it the highest number of crossings on a single day so far this year. It means the total number of small boat arrivals this year now stands at a provisional total of 6,265. It comes as the government's flagship Rwanda policy returns to Parliament, with MPs due to debate the latest amendments by peers. 3 people have died and others in a critical condition following a car crash in North London. It happened near the Staples Corner retail park just before midnight. 5 men, all thought to be in their early 20s, were in one car. Police do not believe any other vehicles were involved in the incident. 3 people were pronounced dead and 2 others were taken to hospital. The 5th man, his injuries are not life-threatening. Emergency services have now removed the wreckage of the vehicle. The FBI has reportedly opened an investigation into the Baltimore Bridge collapse. 6 people were killed when a cargo ship lost power and hit the structure last month. The Washington Post says the federal criminal investigation will partly focus on whether the crew knew the vessel had serious problems with its systems before it left the port. Work to clear the wreck and restore traffic through the shipping channel is ongoing. A man has been arrested following reports of another stabbing in Sydney. A live stream of a sermon at Christ the Good Shepherd Church in the suburb of Wakeley shows a bishop being targeted by a man before worshippers tackled the offender to the ground. It's not clear what he was armed with. New South Wales Police has confirmed those being treated suffered non-life-threatening injuries. Meanwhile, the father of the man who fatally stabbed 6 people at a shopping centre in Sydney has apologised for his son's actions. Joel Couchy killed 5 women and a male security guard on Saturday. Police say they're investigating whether he was specifically targeting women. They believe the 40-year-old suffered from schizophrenia and used drugs, including meth and psychedelics. Andrew Couchy says his son was a very sick boy.
I'm extremely sorry. I'm heartbroken for you. Look, this is so horrendous that I can't even explain it. You're trying to give you an intelligent conversation. I can't do it because I'm just devastated. I love my son. I made myself a servant to my son when I found out he had a mental illness. I became his servant. I did everything because I love that boy.
Over to the US, the first of 4 criminal trials against former President Donald Trump is due to begin shortly. You can see live pictures here from outside of the courthouse in New York. The former president has been charged in connection to a case involving a hush money payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels. He faces a maximum of 4 years in jail if convicted, but could avoid serving time and be fined instead. The trial is expected to last 6 to 8 weeks. Millions of people across the country are set to have access to new long-distance rail routes here in the UK. Under new rail industry plans, open access services on 7 routes are being developed, aiming to boost connectivity, increase competition and reduce fares. York-based prospective open access company Grand Union Trains plans to launch services between London Euston and the city of Stirling in central Scotland from June next year. It's also been given the go-ahead to run trains between London Paddington and South West Wales. And Universal Credit will need to change to meet the challenges of an older and sicker population. That's according to a new report. The Resolution Foundation says the number of benefit claimants who are out of work due to ill health has almost doubled since 2013. The report says both the benefit system and the country have changed significantly since Universal Credit was introduced. The government recently announced changes to the credit scheme aimed at encouraging people with ill health to seek work. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 1. Now, let's start with that horrific news from the last hour that a priest has been stabbed multiple times whilst delivering a mass at a church in Sydney, with the incident coming just days after a man killed 6 people in a Westfield shopping centre in the same area.
Well, we can now speak with member of the Australian Parliament for the Division of Fowler, Dalee. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Absolutely shocking what the world has seen. Footage from this church, this priest brutally stabbed from what we can see. And I know that other worshippers have also been harmed, as we understand. Is that right?
No, look, it's a bishop and it was in his church. He was given a sermon, a wonderful bishop. I know him personally. I've attended his service. Looks like a young man came up and tried to stab him while he was giving the sermon. But I understand that, it has created it was a shocking, obviously a shocking incident, and our community is still reeling from that shock. And as you mentioned earlier, the last couple of days, the incident in Bondi, which is about 45 an hour away from where we are. They're in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, whereas we're in the western suburb of Sydney. That obviously impacts the community. My understanding is that the bishop is currently in our local hospital in Liverpool, and it's not fatal. So thank God for that. But he's a wonderful man, a wonderful bishop. And I know for sure that he would also call for calm. I have one of the most multicultural and multi-faith electorates in the country, in Australia. So I'm very cognizant of the importance of maintaining cohesion at this very obviously sensitive and disturbing time. So I think people are still in shock from the weekend stabbing and killing of innocent lives. So this is just, I think, people already on the edge. But I know that I've heard from the community, members in the community, that he is in hospital and it's not fatal.
It's very, very reassuring to hear that it's not fatal. He seemed like he was such a big figure in the community. I know he had over 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is not a particularly common thing for a member of the clergy. But this does seem like Australia is in a moment of crisis right now. It seems like there is something that has gripped particularly Sydney and its suburbs over the weekend and today. What is the sense in Australia? What's gone wrong?
Look, I don't think we're in crisis. It was a very tragic incident on the weekend. And as I don't know if you heard, the man who was shot dead by a great courageous policewoman has suffered from mental health illness. He's dead. I think it's just a shock of the lives lost. And I think people are still reeling from that. I don't think that really is about Australia overall, what's happening. I mean, we have obviously economic challenges, cost of living crisis, but we also have an increase in mental health issues in our community just post-COVID. And I don't know how we are dealing with the whole, I'm sure in Britain as well, COVID has taken a toll on a lot of people's mental health and well-being. So from my perspective, I hope that these two incidents, of course, they're not connected, but I just hope that people will take time to not get so emotionally reactive, judgmental, and come at a time when there's so much world conflict that is really causing a lot of tension.
Yes, we understand you have to be careful, but do we have any idea of a motive when it comes to this church attack?
Look, I don't have a motive. I don't know what the motives of this young person, this young man from the obviously video was a young man. You don't know people's motives at this stage. I mean, like that man who went and stabbed and killed people at Bondi Junction. What was his motive? I mean, he had mental health. Sometimes something can snap. So let's not jump to conclusion. Let's not jump to judgment at this stage. I would like to leave all of that to police to investigate. But the most important thing is for me, as the elected member here, that our community have a very strong Assyrian heritage, a group of Australians here who love the bishop, and the bishop loves his congregation.
And I should just say we're looking at images of protests now outside the church. Could you explain what's going on here? There seems to be a huge mass of people who have got to be outside this church now.
Look, I'm not there, but from my guess is that, I mean, like his church, he does draw a lot of followers. And as you mentioned, he's got a huge following. And I think the word would have spread. And, in social media, words get spread so quickly and information gets sent out. The area is a high population of Australians of Assyrian heritage that live around there. So I have no doubt they would have heard about it. They would have tried to come out and see what was going on. And of course, the rumours is that the person who tried to attack the bishop who's still in the church. So I think these community members were angry because the police got there. So that's from my understanding. People are very on the edge at the moment, I think, my community. So I would urge, obviously people, just to be very calm, let the police, and I have no doubt that when the bishop get out, he would also ask for calm. And he's a wonderful man. I can just imagine what he would do. He would say, listen, God's willing, God is, protected him, and we should be forgiving. That is just him, and I can hear him. Ma Mari, that's the bishop there. He's the bishop of the Good Samaritan, because there we've got a few churches of Assyrian heritage here, Assyrian churches. He's one church. There's other churches of Assyrian lineage, Orthodox. Sorry, not Orthodox, Assyrian church. Yeah.
Well, Daili, thank you so much for bringing us all of that. Really, really appreciate you staying up for us and talking us there from your division there in Parliament, the independent Australian Member of Parliament there for the division of Fowler.
Yes, and we wish everyone well, of course, and to the bishops himself. But let's move on to domestic news, because a record number of migrants have crossed the Channel this year so far. Over 6,000 people have arrived in the UK now on small boats this year, a 30% increase on the previous year.
It comes as the government's flagship migration plan, the Safety of Rwanda bill, is being debated again today in Parliament.
Shall we speak to our Home and Security editor, Mark White? The number of people who continue to make this perilous journey from the French coast to ours continues to increase. The government have said that they've got the numbers down, but it seems like actually the facts now show that they have not.
Well, they do show that indeed. I mean, the timing could not be worse for Rishi Sunak, as the Rwanda bill is back in the Commons. And of course, he wants the focus to be on the fact that it will become law within days and pave the way, he hopes, for these flights to go to East Africa with those who are coming across the Channel. And the hope, of course, being that this will break the business model of the people smuggling gangs. But all the while, more people are coming across the Channel. We had 534 who arrived in 10 small boats yesterday, and 214 who arrived in 5 small boats the day before. So we're looking at around 750 just over this weekend. And that figure from yesterday was the biggest daily arrival this year so far, taking, as you say, the total to now 6,200, and that is almost 30% up on where we were at this period last year. And the government was able last year to stand up and to trumpet the fact that they had led to a third in a fall of those crossing the English Channel. They said, Rishi Sunak and other ministers, that was in no small part due to the government's stop the boats policy. They're not able to say that now, while the total reversal has happened here. And let's see just how this progresses as the year moves on, because if we get consistent good weather in the Channel, and it's a bit unpredictable at the moment, but if conditions improve as we move into the summer and we start getting record numbers crossing the Channel, it's going to be very difficult, very uncomfortable for the government.
Very difficult indeed. Well, Mark White, thank you very much for the latest there, some shocking new numbers. Let's cross now to Westminster with our political editor, Christopher Hope, joining us live from Downing Street. Christopher, what do you have for us?
Hi Tom, hi Emily. Yeah, well the broken up lobby meeting, which was evacuated from 70 Whitehall moments ago, is now concluded, and we have heard from the government on those numbers that Mark's describing. The government says, number 10 says, it's unacceptable the number of people still crossing the channel, and this is why this is so important, this Safety of Rwanda bill, which we expect to be law by Thursday after the Lords reject it again tomorrow, and it'll be pushed through, I think, by Wednesday, I expect. There's a message here from number 10 from the PM official spokesman to peers saying that Parliament has the opportunity to pass a bill which has the ability to save lives. Now is the time to change the equation of these gangs and unite. These gangs that Mark knows very well, he's been in France doing some brilliant reporting for GB News. He has seen how they flex numbers going across. They know when to push them across and when to hold back, and how to play cat and mouse with the border force and the French police. I should say the French are stopping a lot of boats crossing the channel. On one day last week, hundreds were stopped in small boats crossing. Those numbers may sort of tally up with the numbers that Mark revealed there, but there are more trying to get across. The French are doing their bit, but no question the government has got really hope he can get the Safety of Rwanda bill through this week, and then over to the courts, and let's see if 150 or so can take off in the first plane, maybe as soon as next month.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope there outside Downing Street for us, bringing the latest, the government's perspective, trying to put pressure on the peers in the House of Lords to essentially just let this bill pass. That's what they're asking.
Well, I've got the date in my diary. Thursday is the potential conclusion of this bill's passage, and my goodness, it's had a long sort of journey through both houses and what they've known as ping pong. But more on that later.
Yes, because coming up, as Lord Cameron, David Cameron, urges Israel to be smart as well as tough on Iran, we'll be debating just how Israel should respond to that unprecedented attack from Iran. Should they fight back? How exactly should they respond? Stay with us.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The perception of a crime being committed is not based on whether that person intended to commit a crime or not, but whether the victim, in inverted commas, or anybody else for that matter who happened to hear whatever was said, determines that it was motivated by malice or ill will. Most of these things come out in heated exchanges or in, very casual exchanges. And then somebody says, oh, I'm offended, or I'm hurt, or I'm whatever, because this was clearly malicious and it's against me as a black person or a transgender or sexuality, whatever it might be. And somebody says, I perceive this to be motivated by hate. Now, at that point, what is the reasonable test that anybody could apply as to what was in somebody's mind at the time? You don't know what I'm thinking now. I don't know what you're thinking now. Why is it that a crime can be committed on the basis of what somebody is alleged to be thinking?
Well, that's also how discrimination often works, because people have worked out these days that saying something or sending an email like one I received some years ago that said, let's go round her place with pickaxe handles and balaclavas and see what we can do. Now, that's an email that was sent about me. People have worked out that you don't do that. But from the circumstance of what happens, if racial taunts were being shouted, if taunts about someone's protected characteristic were being shouted in the run-up to what then happened, it would be pretty obvious that that was a hate crime.
But we know, for example, that street preachers have been arrested merely for quoting the Bible and without actually intending, anything beyond that.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo
there'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 25 minutes past 1. And let's get to the growing tensions in the Middle East. There are fears of escalation of this conflict following Iran's enormous missile strikes on Israel.
Yes, Iran warns they'll strike again with greater force if Israel or the United States retaliate. Meanwhile, Foreign Secretary Lord David Cameron has urged Israel to be careful in how it responds and to think with its head, not its heart.
Now, just how should Israel react? Joining us to debate this is the former British Army officer and defence analyst Stuart Crawford, who thinks that Israel has every right to respond, and the co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani, who doesn't think they should retaliate and there should be a clear de-escalation now. Stuart Crawford, let's start with you. Why is it in the interests of Israel, but frankly also Britain, for a strike back to occur?
Well, whether it's in the interest of Britain, of course, is another thing altogether, and that very much depends on how the US supports or chooses not to support Israel. But I think the first duty of any government is to defend the state and the people who live there. And we could argue till the cows come home who started it, and go back decades, if not hundreds of years, to try and come up with some sort of tit-for-tat thing. But it's a bit like a playground argument at the moment. There's no doubt that the instigator of the current round of violence was the Israeli strike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus. But I'm not convinced that the two IRGC brigadiers and their entourage who were killed in that strike just happened to be passing by and had popped in for a cup of tea and a chocolate biscuit. I think that something was afoot there that the Israelis knew about, and they decided that the time was right to do a preemptive strike, and they were right to do that. I do feel that Iran's response by sending over 300 assorted aerial vehicles has handed the initiative back to Israel, because Israel is no longer the bad guy. The Iranians are in worldview. And so Israel will decide, as it is every right to, when and if it's going to respond. But I suspect there will be some sort of response, but not necessarily an attack on mainland Iran.
Well, let's throw that back to Aaron Bastani. Aaron, this was an unprecedented attack by Iran. Surely Israel has a right here to respond.
I think that's the perfect word, Tom. Right. They have, of course, they have a right to defend themselves. I don't think anybody would dispute that. The question is it rational? Should they? And I don't think it's in Israel's rational self-interest to. I can hear myself coming through twice. Right? That's not an issue for you guys. I mean, some of these.
Yeah, I think we're having some audio issues there. Let's see if we can sort those out to get back to you, because I think that is a really important point that we were raising there.
About what the rational response is.
Yes.
Stuart, should we come back to you on this then? Lots of people calling for Israel to think with its head, not its heart. But I can't help but think that if such an attack had been launched on British territory, we would not sit on our hands.
Well, no, I don't think we would. I mean, I think the government would be expected by the population of Great Britain to retaliate in some way or other. And I don't think turning the other cheek is really an option, given the severity of the attack that has been made upon Israel, even although it was largely defeated. But I think Iran has made a strategic mistake. And I think that the ball is now in Israel's court, and it's up for the Israeli government to decide how and when it's going to respond, if at all. And despite President Joe Biden, the US president, saying that the US will not join Israel in any sort of retaliatory strikes, you can bet your bottom dollar they will not let, under any circumstances, Israel be defeated.
Absolutely. I suppose the worry here is, though, that if Israel decides as a matter of pride or as a matter, frankly, of self-assurance as a nation which faces many threats on its borders, I believe we have Aaron Bastani back with us now. Aaron, sorry, we were only halfway through your point before we ran into some audio issues. You believe that there is a difference between the right of Israel and what perhaps is rational.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So, for instance, right at the top of the conversation, we were asking, does Israel have a right to strike back? Of course it does. I mean, any sensible person has a right to strike back, has the right to self-defense, as any sovereign country does. The question is it intelligent? Is it rational? And I think, there's one thing that really struck me after the events of the weekend, which is that to mobilise Iron Dome and to bring down these drones, ballistic missiles, etc., 300 projectiles of various kinds, to bring those down, cost, according to an IDF source, the best part of $1 billion. It's not cheap to oversee one of the best anti-missile protection systems in the world, if not the best. That's quite an expensive thing to do. And I think that probably has to feature Israel's rationale as well. If this happens 3, 4, 5 times, you're looking at multiple billions of dollars. And I think there will come a moment where the White House would say, well, look, we've just given you this $14 billion aid package. And, we don't think it's a particularly wise use of funds if we could it. And I think it is avoidable. Next, I hope, in the symbolic show.
Aaron, what country in the world would accept such an attack on their territory and essentially just sit on their hands and accept it because they don't want to risk any kind of escalation here? I mean, this attack, if it had been successful, could have wiped out huge numbers of Israeli people. Is it really realistic for Israel to just say, well, we need to be a bit calm about this and not do anything in return? OK, I think we're having a lot of issues with Aaron's line there, which is a real shame. We'll have to come back to Stuart. Stuart, just to finish on you then, what options exactly do Israel have? You've said that they may decide to do something. You say that they may choose not to. What would you say is the most sensible strategic move for Israel?
Well, I don't think it would make any sense for anybody for them to attack Tehran and Iran with conventional military forces at this stage, although they could do if they wish to, because the route to Iran from Israel is over mainly friendly or neutral airspace, and they can do that. And I know the US has said it won't join in, but the US has got huge military presence in the region, and I think it would be difficult for the United States to stay out of it. But I don't think an extreme response is necessarily the wisest at this stage. And all I would say is I think we'll be looking at attacks against proxy, Iranian proxy military and militias in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq and elsewhere. And also, if I was a senior general in the IRGC, I'd be certainly changing my routine, ditching my mobile telephone and checking under my car before I get into it.
Goodness me, what a warning there. Stuart Crawford, thank you very much for joining us and talking through that. And thanks too to Aaron Bastani earlier as well. Big apologies that the line there wasn't as clear as it could have been.
Yes, we'll find out what happened and fix it. But coming up, we'll be discussing how hundreds of Manchester Arena terrorist attack survivors are now suing the MI5 for an alleged failure to take action that could have stopped the bombing. What is their case? But first, let's get your news headlines.
Good afternoon. The top stories at 1:33. Escalating tensions in the Middle East will be addressed by the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in the Commons this afternoon. The Foreign Secretary has confirmed RAF jets shot down a number of Iranian drones and missiles after hundreds were fired at Israel at the weekend. Lord Cameron says the UK will now consider further sanctions against Tehran. The United Nations has warned the Middle East is on the brink and is urging Israel not to retaliate. But the country's war cabinet is split on the timing and scale of any response. 534 people were intercepted in the English Channel yesterday, making it the highest number of crossings in a single day so far this year. It means the total number of small boat arrivals this year now stands at a provisional total of 6,265. It comes as the government's flagship Rwanda policy returns to Parliament, with MPs due to debate the latest amendments by peers. The FBI has reportedly opened an investigation into the Baltimore Bridge collapse. 6 people were killed when a cargo ship lost power and hit the structure last month. The Washington Post says the federal criminal investigation will partly focus on whether the crew knew the vessel had serious problems with its systems before it left the port. And the father of the man who fatally stabbed 6 people at a shopping centre in Sydney on Saturday has apologised for his son's actions. Joel Couchy killed 5 women and a male security guard. Police say they're investigating whether he was specifically targeting women. They believe the 40-year-old suffered from schizophrenia and used drugs, including meth and psychedelics. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2477 and €1.1707. The price of gold is £1,888 and 27 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,987 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
The latest GB News travel.
Hello again to you, I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to Scotland. Firstly, the eastbound M8, still seeing some queues. Junction 28, that's Glasgow Airport, towards Paisley and round through Junction 27. An earlier collision has cleared, all the lanes are back open now. Lancashire, the northbound M6 delays from Junction 30 up to Salisbury at 31. All lanes back open again, though, following an earlier bump, now safely on the hard shoulder. A 3-mile queue anti-clock M25 just before Junction 27. The inside lane is coned off as a collision that gets recovered. At the M48 Severn Bridge, both ways between Wales and England remains closed for strong winds. And speaking of crossings, on the ferries, the FDS reporting delays of up to 90 minutes between Dover and Dunkirk and Dover and Calais. That's all due to the poor weather conditions. And that's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Cold winds for most of us today. Those cold winds bring plenty of showers, but there will be some bright spells in between. Chance of rainbows in places. We've seen a cold front move across the country overnight. That's clearing the southeast late morning, and once that clears, we're into this cold airflow from the northwest. Gusty wind could cause some issues in 1 or 2 spots. 50-mile-per-hour gusts here and there. But that wind also bringing plenty of showers. Showers lively in places, hail and thunder, particularly towards the northeast of the UK. In between, a few sunny spells, although it's not going to feel warm in that wind. Highs of 11 to 13 Celsius in the south, 8 to 11 in the north. Through the evening and overnight, we'll see further showers coming through, but eventually there'll be longer, drier and clearer spells developing, and with lighter winds also developing. Well, temperatures will dip into the mid-single figures, perhaps towards northwestern parts, the low single figures, so a touch of ground frost possible as we start off Tuesday. And Tuesday begins with further cloud and showers for eastern parts in particular, 1 or 2 showers further west, developing as the day goes on. But all in all, fewer showers compared with today, a better chance of some sunshine in between, lighter winds, and as a result, well, it's going to feel marginally less cold.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive?
Incompetent? That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 39 minutes past 1. Now, hundreds of Manchester Arena terrorist attack survivors are suing MI5 for an alleged failure to take action that could well have stopped the bombing.
Yes, the group of more than 250 victims and their loved ones submitted the claim, which is understood to be the first time legal action has ever been taken against the MI5 for an alleged failure to stop a domestic terror attack. What does this mean?
Well, joining us to discuss this is barrister Rebecca Butler. Rebecca, it wasn't until relatively recently that the government even acknowledged MI5 existed. And now it seems that there is an ability to take it to court. Do the claimants here have any grounds?
Well, arguably they do have grounds. I mean, the tribunal that they've issued their claim in is the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, which was set up in 2000 but has been amended over the years. And it's normally a tribunal dealing with surveillance and, CCTV evidence and things like that. And yeah, the security services are included in the remit of the tribunal. So arguably, yes. The remedies available could arguably also apply to the Manchester Arena bombing victims' families. So it is a groundbreaker, but it's not outside the remit of that specific tribunal, as a matter of fact.
Very interesting indeed. I wonder then, could there be a legal challenge for any terror attack that happens domestically? Could victims of a terror attack say, well, the MI5 should have foreseen this, they should have done more, therefore I have a legal case?
Well, I think you have to look at how this would have come about in the first place, and this is from the Sir John Saunders inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombings, which I know you did cover, Tom, on your programme. And at the time, it was acknowledged that there were two key pieces of information that MI5 didn't react upon. And they only told us what one of them was, and that was the fact that Salman Abedi arrived back in the country from Libya 4 days immediately prior to the attack. So that was one piece of evidence. We weren't told what the other piece of evidence was, but Sir John Saunders was very clear that it might have prevented Salman Abedi. They might have looked at his car, they might have looked at his flat, which is where all the bomb-making equipment was hidden. So it does come off the back of an inquiry where there is a judicial statement that says that there was a failing in communication between MI5 and the police in relation to this particular assailant. You'd also look at the Fishmongers Hall inquiry. The coroner's report there actually led to a fatal death report, which was recently reported on. I think that was December last year. And that also dealt with the failings of the security and the probation services. So, yes, there is precedent for this, but I think you wouldn't really felt you had access into the Investigatory Powers Tribunal until you had a judicial statement such as the Sir John Saunders statement in the inquiry itself.
It does seem very odd here, given, frankly, how successful our security services have been since 7/7. We haven't had many large incidents. Of course, 2017 was a particularly bad year with this number of attacks. But frankly, there have been relatively few terror attacks in the United Kingdom. Manchester Arena stands out as the only mass terrorist attack, really, frankly, since the 2000s. I just find it very hard to see how you can expect, as a reasonable person, to think that the security services will get it right every single time, that every single threat must be completely quashed. I mean, wouldn't a court find that that is an unreasonable expectation?
It's certainly open to that tribunal, actually, Tom. And if you look at the results of that tribunal, it is only a handful of percent, and I mean under 5%, that actually do bring successful claims within that tribunal. But I think, you know, it's interesting the way you phrase that question, because it's almost as though you've normalized terrorist activity and said, well, actually, we've only had one since 7/7, but actually we haven't. We've had a lot of terrorist activity. It's just a mass suicide bombing we haven't had. We've had lone wolf attacks, and we can't become a society that normalizes it, because if we normalize it, then we start saying we don't have to try and do better. And one of the key facts in both the Fishmongers Hall and the Manchester Arena bombings is a failure in effective communication between the agencies of MI5 and Special Branch. There was actually specific reference by Sir John Saunders to the corporate response of MI5 to seek to retroactively justify their failure to act. And he said that was merely a corporate response, because when intelligence officers were asked to report to him, he said that if they had seen the intelligence, they would have acted differently. So, you know, it is, I think this is a good thing, by the way. It is breaking legal ground. It would be nice to see the Investigatory Powers Tribunal tell us a little bit more about how many people are actually on the terrorist watch list, because it's inevitable, as you've pointed out, the MI5 is going to say, we've got 80 to 100,000 people on our watch list. Yeah. How can we possibly do everything? But we've also got AI, we've also got massive computing and skill. We've got all of those abilities.
It'll be absolutely fascinating, Rebecca, to see what happens with this case. Thank you so much for your expertise on this one. Really great to speak to you. Barrister Rebecca Butler there.
Absolutely right to pick me up on the fact that there have been more terrorist attacks, but lone wolf ones rather than sort of mass bombing campaigns.
Very, very interesting. Let us know what you make of that conversation. But coming up, Donald Trump. He is on his way to court. His motorcade has just set off in New York. Now, this is a live shot from the court, where he will arrive very shortly. Lots of police presence there. You can see there's a aerial shot, tracking shot. And is that Trump Tower? What's that? No, that is the court.
That looks like the court there in New York. Will, of course, be live on the scene after this.
Britain's newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
Men's mental health. Men are starting to talk a lot more. You've been through a lot of stuff that people don't know about.
Yeah, I mean, the last few years for me have been very, very difficult. People see me on tour, performing, making music, but myself and my wife, you know, we went through 2 miscarriages. You know, and you know, for us, that was a very devastating time and very difficult to know how to kind of process those emotions. And I guess as a man, I did the thing of bottling up my emotions, and where I feel comfortable to be able to express myself is in the studio, whereas, you know, she had obviously a different reaction to, you know, what happened to us, because not only was it happening to her mentally, psychologically, but it was happening to her physically as well. And I think something that she really wanted to see from me was that sensitivity and that emotion. And I thought that as a man, being strong was trying to bottle up my emotions and just show her that, no, you know, that I'm being strong for her. But actually being strong is talking about it. And what's happened ever since I've started to talk about it is I've spoken to more men that have experienced baby loss. My wife forced out of me, you know, how do you feel? And I ended up as a mess on the floor. I was exasperating, crying, almost inconsolable. She was just holding me in her arms as we cried together, and we cried together. And I didn't realise I needed that release so badly. Like I said, I've been able to speak to other men, and we've been able to cry together, and they shared their own experiences, which they did similar to me. But actually, you know, as men, I feel like that conversation and that sensitivity and being able to be emotional together.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Now we're still waiting for Donald Trump to arrive at that New York courthouse. But in the meantime, a leading motoring organisation has called for all new drivers to be banned from giving lifts to friends for 6 whole months after passing their tests.
Yes, the AA says around 5,000 people every year are killed and seriously injured in crashes involving at least one young motorist. It wants graduated driving licenses introduced with limitations imposed on a period of time after a driver passes their test. So a two-tier system.
Well, is this sensible or yet more ageism when it comes to regulating our habits in the United Kingdom? Let's speak to Quentin Wilson, a motoring journalist and transport campaigner. Really interested to get your thoughts on this, Quentin. There are a lot of people who instinctively will say this is state overreach. This is telling adults that they can't do something that they've done for generations. What's your view?
Well, look, the recent accident with the convertible Mini where people were twerking in the back, this is due to driver education. The person in control of that car really should have told the passengers just to buckle up and stay still. So as far as I'm concerned, putting restrictions on licenses is bolting the stable door off the horses run the first furlong. We're not teaching kids to drive properly. We expect them to do all this stuff below the dashboard, grinding of gears, hazard perception, positioning of car in this very, very small time window when we should be doing it from school age, teaching hazard perception and road safety. And you can't put road safety messages into a teenager who spent the last decade playing Grand Theft Auto and watching Top Gear. The time to do it is when they're young and they're responsive. So I've been a patron of an organisation called Young Driver, who's delivered 1.4 million lessons to 11 to 17-year-olds on private land with ADI qualified instructors with dual controls. And the accident rate for that group is 4% of past pupils who've had accidents since the programme. The national average is 20%. So look, we can do this, we can reduce these fatalities if we teach kids earlier about road safety.
I mean, is this an issue, frankly, with teenage boys? If I cast my mind back to my school days, when I got my licence, I was extremely careful and wanted to be as safe as possible, perhaps too careful, perhaps too hesitant even. But some of my friends who were boys, I mean, I won't go into the type of driving they were doing, but let's say there may have been a little bit of recklessness and showing off.
The testosterone does always seem to come through, doesn't it? I mean, I've got a 19-year-old daughter now who's just, passed her test and been driving 2 years, and she's now lecturing her male friends on road safety. So yeah, there's an absolute corollary between male and female drivers and risk. But
Quentin, I'm terribly sorry, but we're just getting live footage of Trump entering the court, so we're going to have to leave it there. Quentin Wilson.
Yes, this is indeed Trump's motorcade.
His motorcade.
Driving to New York. We're going to be looking at this. It's an almost presidential motorcade, really. Of course, Donald Trump lost that election 4 years ago, but we can now see this motorcade sort of driving fairly slowly here down through the streets of New York, heading towards that courthouse. Of course, this will be the first time that a former president has appeared at a criminal court hearing. And today, the hearing is all about selecting those all-important members of the jury.
Yes, a lot of work will go into selecting the jury. They've got to try and find people who won't have preconceived views, which may well be impossible.
You'll have to find people who don't own televisions.
Yeah.
You'll have to find people who aren't on the internet. I'm being facetious, of course, but it's very hard-pressed, especially in New York City, to find individuals who don't have a strong opinion one way or the other about one of the most controversial presidents of recent history.
And this is the hush money trial, of course. It's all about the falsifying of business records. That's the allegation here. First criminal trial of its kind for a former president, isn't it?
Absolutely fascinating stuff. Now, in one of those cars is the former president, Donald Trump. They're taking up that entire road. You can sort of see them straddling both lanes, making sure no one can get past, a security measure, of course. But these cars will be rocking up at that courtroom, and we'll be bringing you all the very latest on this sensational trial. It comes as, of course, the former president takes on Joe Biden in this election season. Fascinating stuff. Stay with us here on GB News. We'll bring you all the latest.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, welcome to the Met Office weather forecast. It's going to be a blustery afternoon with further heavy showers coming through. They do ease later on with the chance of clear spells developing overnight, but generally low pressure is in charge of our forecast for the rest of the day. Low pressure sitting in the North Sea, bringing a gusty and cold northwesterly wind with it. These showers are going to be lively where they occur. Hail and thunder a possibility. They do tend to ease overnight with clear spells developing. The showers becoming more confined to eastern parts along with the gusty wind, and with plenty of clear spells towards western and northwestern parts, temperatures will dip into the mid-single figures, perhaps a bit lower in one or two shelter spots. So a touch of ground frost here and there as we begin Tuesday, but otherwise plenty of bright weather first thing. Still be some cloud and showers along the east coast, and further showers will bubble up as the day gets going elsewhere. But there'll be fewer showers and there'll be more sunshine compared with today, with temperatures responding a little better. 14, perhaps 15 in the south, 11 or 12 further north, and with lighter winds feeling more pleasant. Wednesday starts off with a frost in places, clear spells first thing. Plenty of sunshine through the morning though, although there will be some cloudier skies returning to Northern Ireland later and a few showers elsewhere. All in all, it's looking like an improved picture as we end the week. Higher pressure, drier weather.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
With thanks to Variety Cruises, a family company sailing since 1942, you have the chance to win a £10,000 7-night small boat cruise for two. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, you'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and explore Greece like never before. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task. This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Monday, the 15th of April.
Yes, and here we are. Trump is on his way to court. We've got live pictures there on the left here from New York following his motorcade. Within hours, Donald Trump will become the first US president ever to face a criminal trial.
Yes, indeed. And, of course, this New York trial is controversial. Today, of course, is the selection of the jury, and there are big questions. Donald Trump supporters asking, can it be a fair trial in one of the most heavily democratic cities in the United States? How will they be able to find 12 jurors who can maintain an impartial and unbiased opinion of one of the most controversial men in the United States?
And they'll have 12 jurors, and they also need to find an extra 6, don't they, as stand-ins as well. They'll be asking many questions of those jurors to check whether they may have political biases.
But here we are, the motorcade seems to have stopped, and we might be able to catch a glimpse of the 45th President of the United States stepping out into a first in the United States of America, a criminal trial of a former president.
Yes, it's difficult to overstate just how unprecedented this trial is in American history. The world is watching as we speak. The motorcade there. We're expecting Donald Trump to at some point step out and head in. We'll see how he reacts. Whether there's press out there waiting for him. There's a huge police presence that we can see.
And indeed, there's over 10 cars in this motorcade. It's been a long journey for Donald Trump and his large entourage of advisors and indeed lawyers as they make their way towards this courtroom. But as we say, the motorcade has now stopped. A door is opening, and we can see there Donald Trump stepping out of the car. He's heading towards, he's waving to the media, and he's stepping towards that courthouse.
So there you go.
This is a momentous moment in American history and, frankly, in this year's presidential election due to take place in November. How long will this particular trial last? Could it dominate, frankly, this year's presidential campaign?
And of course, many of his supporters will argue that this is a weaponization of the justice system. Others will see this as justice in action. But we will follow what happens in that court to the T as well. But yes, the jury selection first, that could take days. That could take days. So the whole thing could take months.
Well, there we go. We've seen Donald Trump, his motorcade arrive at that court, his entourage stop, the former president step out. He is now inside that courtroom. We'll bring much more of that and much more on other news, domestic and foreign, of course, here on Good Afternoon Britain. Have your say, gbnews.com/your say. But before all of that, let's get your very latest news headlines.
Tom, Emily, thank you very much. These are your top stories from the GB newsroom this hour. Escalating tensions in the Middle East will be addressed by the Prime Minister in the Commons this afternoon. The Foreign Secretary has confirmed RAF jets shot down a number of Iranian drones and missiles after hundreds were fired at Israel at the weekend. Lord Cameron says the UK will now consider further sanctions against Iran. The United Nations has warned the Middle East is on the brink and is urging Israel not to retaliate. But the country's war cabinet is split on the timing and scale of any response. Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey says Israel has the right to defend itself.
We have an important role to play alongside allies, as we did over the weekend. It's defensive action, and it was in the face of an utterly unprecedented and unacceptable Iranian attack, direct from Iran as well as from militia groups in other countries.
534 people were intercepted in the English Channel yesterday, making it the highest number of crossings on a single day so far this year. It means the total number of small boat arrivals this year now stands at a provisional total of 6,265. It comes as the government's flagship Rwanda policy returns to Parliament, with MPs due to debate the latest amendments by peers. 3 people have died and others in a critical condition following a car crash in North London. It happened near the Staples Corner retail park just before midnight. 5 men, all thought to be in their early 20s, were in one car. Police do not believe any other vehicles were involved in the incident. 3 people were pronounced dead and 2 others were taken to hospital. The 5th man's injuries are not life-threatening. 2 men have been jailed after police discovered a cocaine haul hidden inside blocks of cheese. Just over £17 million worth of cocaine was seized from the blocks of Gouda after officers raided a unit in Blackburn last May. 46-year-old Salim Chowdhury has been put behind bars for 27.5 years for admitting conspiracy to supply cocaine and money laundering, whilst Raidul Mahabath has been jailed for 16 years. A man has been arrested following reports of another stabbing in Sydney. A live stream of a sermon at Christ the Good Shepherd Church in the suburb of Wakeley shows a bishop being targeted by a man before worshippers tackled the offender to the ground. It's not yet clear what he was armed with. New South Wales Police has confirmed those being treated suffered non-life-threatening injuries. Meanwhile, the father of the man who fatally stabbed 6 people at a shopping centre in Sydney has apologised for his son's actions. Joel Couchy killed 5 women and a male security guard on Saturday. Police say they're investigating whether he was specifically targeting women. They believe the 40-year-old suffered from schizophrenia and used drugs, including meth and psychedelics. Andrew Couchy says his son was a very sick boy.
I'm extremely sorry. I'm heartbroken for you. Look, this is so horrendous that I can't even explain it. You're trying to give you an intelligent conversation. I can't do it because I'm just devastated. I love my son. I made myself a servant to my son when I found out he had a mental illness. I became his servant. I did everything because I love that boy.
The FBI has reportedly opened an investigation into the Baltimore bridge collapse. 6 people were killed when a cargo ship lost power and hit the structure last month. The Washington Post says the federal criminal investigation will partly focus on whether the crew knew the vessel had serious problems with its systems before it left the port. Work to clear the wreck and restore traffic through the shipping channel is ongoing. And in the US, the first of 4 criminal trials against Donald Trump is due to begin shortly. The former president arrived at the court in Manhattan just a few moments ago. He's been charged in connection to a case involving hush money paid to adult film star Stormy Daniels. He faces a maximum of 4 years in prison per charge if convicted. However, it's more likely he'd avoid a jail term and be fined instead. The trial is expected to last 6 to 8 weeks. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 2. Now, we saw Donald Trump arriving at that court in New York for his historic trial. We're just waiting to see him walk through these doors now. We're expecting that any moment.
Any moment now. And this is, of course, his long-awaited hush money trial. This is over a payment of $130,000 he made to the adult film star Stormy Daniels. We are waiting for him to arrive. This is the start of this historic trial, and for the time being, it's all about that jury selection, and this is hugely controversial. Donald Trump and his lawyers and his supporters are saying that it will be near impossible to have a non-biased, fair jury selected in Manhattan because it's overwhelmingly Democrat, but a lot of work is going to be put into trying to select such a jury.
Indeed, one of the early wins for Donald Trump in this whole saga was that his lawyers successfully argued that they would be able to veto members of the jury. So that's what the questioning will be all about, trying to find those who can produce a fair trial. Of course, the other side can veto members of the jury as well. There'll be no Trump fans, but also no Trump haters. At least that is the hope of this exercise. But my goodness, so far this trial has stretched on for years. At least the seeds of it were planted years ago. And so far, the tactic of Donald Trump's lawyers, and perhaps even his political advisors, has been to draw this process out, to make it go on for as long as possible. There is a world in which this trial stretches beyond even November's presidential election.
It'll be very interesting to see how this impacts him politically, his chances of becoming the next president of the United States. Once again, we've seen previously that there's been an uptick in his popularity when we've been speaking about his criminal charges against him, which is very interesting indeed, how this reflects on the public in general.
It would be perhaps less survivable for Donald Trump were there to be one indictment, were everything to focus on one large charge. However, perhaps what has been most successful for Donald Trump here, what's been able to create this narrative of Trump versus the world, is the fact this isn't a single charge. Indeed, Donald Trump faces 100 indictments from all directions over many different aspects of his presidency and indeed pre-presidency life too. There are many political commentators that say this charge of criminality over hush money payments and the declaration thereof of those hush money payments perhaps is the weakest because it focuses in on his private life, on something that perhaps was already baked in to everyone's understanding and idea of Donald Trump.
Yes, he very much wants the world to see this as a weaponization of the justice system. Of course, lots of people will argue the reverse, that he must be held accountable for any crimes he may or may not have committed. But there you go. We're outside the court in New York as he's due to arrive very, very shortly. We were watching his motorcade earlier. 10 cars, 11 cars.
It was over 10 cars, but tantalisingly, this door keeps opening and closing. And every time we sort of lean forward and think, is this the former president? Not quite yet, but it does look like there is movement there. There are phones being held aloft. So quite possibly we're about to see the 45th president of the United States. But this is, of course, an important political moment as well as a legal one. Just what are the implications for the presidential election? And given that this is a criminal trial, the first criminal trial of a president or a former president in the history of the United States, just what will the reactions be? I'm delighted to say that we're able to join now with the founder-director of the UCL Centre on US Politics, Dr. Thomas Gift. And Dr. Gift, as we're waiting to see Donald Trump and his trademark long red tie peer out from behind this rather industrial-looking door, just what are the implications of today's court hearing?
Well, this is a big moment in American politics, of course, because this is the first time we've ever had a president, or in this case, a former president, face an actual criminal trial. You know, there's somewhat degree of anti-climaticism here, simply because we've seen all of the indictments, the successive indictments. But, you know, in terms of the politics, Trump is going to use this moment as he has used every legal moment. The legal challenges that he has faced are really the cornerstone of his campaign. He's used them to fundraise. He's used them to galvanize his base by essentially framing himself as the victim, saying that he is sort of on the receiving end of a political vendetta by the government, by Democrats, by the deep state, and so on. And so I expect, you know, Trump to essentially double down on that narrative.
And what happens if he is found guilty?
Well, if he's found guilty, he could face prison time, but I think that the more likely outcome is that he would simply face probation. This case is expected to last about 6 to 8 weeks. Trump is going to try to drag it out as long as possible and delay. But I think the odds of Trump ever setting foot inside of a jail cell, at least in this case, are very, very small. But it is possible.
And are there any restrictions, Thomas, on what he can say about this case while the trial is on?
So there are a lot of restrictions. And in fact, the judge has already imposed a gag order on him. But what we've seen from Trump is that he tends to flout those regulations, and he has been in violation, or at least close to violation, of these gag orders in multiple instances previously. He essentially says that these court cases are election interference and that they are impinging on his First Amendment freedom of speech rights to express himself, which he suggests is even more important in the midst of the election campaign.
Now, you say Donald Trump is seeking to frame himself as a victim here, saying that sort of the political establishment is against him, that these are political prosecutions, people who can't win at the ballot box seeking to lock up their political opponents. Just how much is the American public buying that narrative?
Well, I think, as you would expect, the numbers are very split by partisanship. So most Republicans are behind Trump, and they believe that this is a witch hunt. They do believe that the government is acting inappropriately. I do think it's worth pointing out that there's quite a lot of variation, though, even across the cases. If you look at this one in particular, it's probably the weakest substantively, and it's a little bit tortured in terms of the legal logic. Trump essentially gave hush money, which is not illegal in and of itself, but the accusation is that he falsified business records. So that complexifies the issue a little bit. It allows Trump to muddy the water. And I think the result of that is it wasn't just Republicans, but also some Democrats who, whenever this indictment came out, suggested that, yeah, this maybe isn't the strongest case. And I think that that works in Donald Trump's favor, because if this is the narrative that is in the minds of voters, subsequent cases that may be a little bit more strong in terms of the classified document case, the January 6th case, and in terms of the Georgia case over vote rigging, they might just discount the rest and say, well, this doesn't look so serious, so I'm guessing that the others are not as well.
I suppose that's Donald Trump's biggest advantage almost here, the idea that all of these cases sort of dilute one another, and say he's cleared of, I don't know, 9 in 10 of them. He'll be able to say, look, I'm 90% innocent. Whereas if there was only one that he was struck by, the balance would appear, just through simple presentation terms, to be the other way round.
Well, Trump is such a showman, and of course he'll use this trial to his advantage. We saw that both in the 2 impeachments. While he was president, he essentially said, well, I'm exonerated because the Senate didn't convict me. And so I expect him to do the very same thing here. I think that the odds of actually getting conviction are very small. And so we could probably imagine Trump standing in front of the courtroom with a newspaper in his hand saying exonerated, even if that's not what a not guilty verdict actually means. That's how he's going to frame it. And so I do think that there holds both pitfalls, but also political opportunities for Trump here.
And this issue of jury selection, it's very much being hyped up. Is it possible to find a jury that is totally, completely, 100% impartial?
Well, I certainly think it's a reasonable question to ask. And there are a couple reasons why. One is this case is being tried in New York. Of course, New York is notoriously liberal, and a whole lot of registered Republicans. on the voter list. But, at the same time, Trump is such a polarizing figure, and these cases have attracted such media attention that, even individuals who might not be strong Republican or might not be strong Democrat, it's hard to say that they're, going into this case completely objective. And so a lot of the questions that are going to be asked are going to regard things like, did you ever follow Donald Trump on social media? Do you watch CNN or do you watch Fox News? Do you ever have any any predisposition toward Trump in this particular case?
And will the press be privy? Will the press be privy to the jury selection? Will they be present? Will they hear the decision making on that?
I have to admit, I'm not sure about that. I don't think so. This case is not going to be televised generally. They're going to be snapshot photos. But I think that the jury selection is going to be private, simply because the individuals who are not going to be on the jury, they don't want that to get out. But I'm not 100% sure, to be honest, in this case.
The fascinating sort of series of events that could happen here just all seem to me to get weirder and weirder and weirder. One of the most peculiar culminations of all of these things in sort of the possible future trees that we could travel down is that it could end up that the former president is incarcerated, is then elected president again, and pardons himself. Is that a possible pathway here?
It's certainly possible. I think it's unlikely. I do think that the odds that Trump is jailed for this particular case are very low. And I think that the rest of the cases are going to go beyond the election. But you're absolutely right. Technically, Trump could pardon himself. There is some sort of constitutional debate about whether that is permissible. You can bet that Donald Trump would take advantage of that if he had the opportunity. It's more likely that we're going to see probably a not guilty verdict here. And then if Donald Trump is elected, what he can do is terminate all of the federal cases against him simply by installing a favorable attorney general who promises to end these prosecutions and investigations. That will still leave the Georgia state case because it's not a federal, it's not under purview, but this is sort of a possible scenario.
And this Georgia case is the most dangerous one for him. So if we zoom out of New York and go right down to the south, it's peculiar because Georgia has been more politically volatile than perhaps many people might expect. And he might not be able to get himself out of that one, even if elected president.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting case because you're right. It's a state case and it's not federal. And so he wouldn't have any jurisdiction over that. Of course, there's all sorts of politics right now surrounding the judge in that case and whether there's sort of impartiality there. But I think you're right. The Georgia case in many ways probably is the most serious because you have Trump on audio tape saying, "Can you find me more votes?" Now, I do think that sort of the way that you frame that gives him sufficient wiggle room, and there's a degree of ambiguity there that even in that instance is unlikely to be found guilty. But yeah, I mean, it's very unprecedented. The term is often overused, I think, but with Trump, we really haven't seen anything like this before, so it's hard to predict.
And Thomas, thank you, by the way, for giving us your thoughts extensively. But tactically speaking, from a political point of view, when it comes to the Democrats and how they deal with this, do they talk about this a lot? Should Joe Biden comment on this? Should they be making a big thing of this from their perspective? Will this do them well, serve them well politically to be very outspoken on the issue of Donald Trump and this court trial?
Well, I think you're going to see a split in terms of Democrats. When it comes to Joe Biden, he's going to be completely silent, or as silent as you can get on this particular case, because he doesn't want to give the appearance that he's putting his thumb on the scales of justice, particularly in his role in the White House. But I think for other Democrats, obviously they're trying to make the case that Donald Trump is a criminal, and do you want someone like this in the White House? That's going to be a key theme that will emerge in super PACs and with Joe Biden surrogates. But yeah, Biden himself, I think, wants to stay at an arm's length from this particular case and won't discuss it.
Now, for those just joining us, I should explain that we're staring at two rather imposing doors, which we're expecting to open any moment now and see the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, walk out of. With us is the founding director of the UCL Centre on US Politics, Dr. Thomas Grift. And Thomas, we have seen at previous... oh, that was a very naughty opening of the door. I got very excited then for a second. But Thomas, we have seen at previous events like this, Donald Trump make a little statement, give a little speech, almost a stump speech to the assembled media. Do you think that he'll do something like that on this occasion?
Yeah, it's possible. Again, I don't think he wants to violate the gag order right away. He'll probably wait a little bit for that. But this is all highly curated, right? And the Donald Trump campaign knows what it's doing. It knows what message it wants to communicate. So it wouldn't surprise me. I don't know exactly what's in the minds of the Trump campaign at the moment. You know, if they want to do this here, if they want to do it later, if he just wants to make a statement on Trump Social. But rest assured, we will hear from Donald Trump.
And I think everyone will be fascinated to see how he responds to this, because perhaps most interestingly throughout this, despite what everyone assumes and the sort of narrative around the hush money and the case of Stormy Daniels and all of her lurid tell-all sort of verbiage about, I don't quite want to go into the detail of what she has been intimately describing about Donald Trump, but he still maintains that there was no affair.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. So Donald Trump has been complete, he's essentially denied all of these charges. He's denied the affair, and he's also denied falsifying business records. So, he's basically saying I should get off scot-free here, both legally as well as politically.
No, it's absolutely fascinating, this case. And as you say, this is one of many cases to come, perhaps the least serious in terms of legal implications for Donald Trump, although it is the first criminal trial that he's facing.
Well, Thomas, would you mind reminding us of exactly what he has been accused of?
Sure. So the details of this case are quite salacious in terms of, the context and the background, involving porn stars and hush money and all of this. But really, the legal case itself simply hinges on whether Trump falsified business records with respect to the hush money payment, essentially to avoid taxes. This goes to sort of campaign finance laws. So that's really the main issue at stake. And it's one that Trump denies.
And it's fascinating, really, all of the theatre around this. Donald Trump's such a theatrical politician. There must be a part of him that actually quite enjoys this. The eyes of the world upon him. He loves being the showman. He brought back sort of the politics of the rally to the United States. In some ways, he'll enjoy the anticipation, the eyes of the world on this moment, on these doors.
I absolutely agree with you. Donald Trump is megalomaniac. He enjoys the spotlight. He likes nothing more than to be the center of attention. I don't necessarily think that all news is good news for Donald Trump. He did try to delay this, and he did try to avoid this trial from actually occurring. But now that it's here, he's going to use it. He's going to exploit it. He's going to leverage it. And he has been very effective doing so, just from a pure political standpoint so far. The language that he used, ability to resonate with Republican voters, to really emphasize the politics of grievance and to fit that into a broader campaign narrative about how elites and the establishment and Washington are not operating in the best interest of America. It's hard to deny that he's been very effective at that, and that's one reason why, even though the polls are very close, he seems to have an edge, according to most data.
Well, let's touch on those polls now, because there has been a narrative that sort of Donald Trump is almost the assumed next president of the United States. And of course, he has won before with less than half the popular vote. What really matters is the crucial swing states. But as you say, things are on a knife edge as things stand.
Right. I think you're absolutely correct that this race is essentially a dead heat. And almost all the polls that I have seen the margin of difference between Trump and Biden is within the margin of error. And so I think it's very difficult to make any projections this far out. And of course, the national polls don't mean anything. But even if you look state by state, the New York Times has done some recent battleground state polling in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, Michigan, in Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, almost all those cases, it's about 50-50. It's one reason why I think that a third-party candidate could really make a difference. I don't think that a third-party candidate can actually, but all a third-party candidate has to do is attract a few percentage of the votes in 1, 2, 3, maybe a handful of states. That could really be enough to tip the balance one way or the other. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., according to some polls, has upwards of 15% of Americans who say that they will at least consider voting for him. He'll probably attract a lot of Trump voters as well as a lot of Biden voters. A lot of sort of who he ultimately appeals to will be determined by how he frames himself in the general election. But I think that that's a big X factor that we're not looking at as we sort of gaze at these polls that are very, very close.
And in terms of demographics, who is supporting Donald Trump currently? Has his support grown in ethnic minority diverse areas? Is his support based on white America? Tell us whether that's shifted.
Well, the bulk of Trump voters are still members of the white working class. This is a demographic that has really experienced a realignment. Used to be solidly with Democrats and now has turned Republican, especially over the last 2 elections. But it is interesting to note, you're absolutely correct, that Trump has made significant inroads with minority voters, no more so than with young Black voters. He's also made significant inroads with some members of the Asian community. It's hard to talk about some of these demographics as complete monoliths because they really do vary in terms of the background and geographically. But Donald Trump's coalition, if he is reelected, could look quite a bit different than the one that ushered him into power in 2016. I think it actually will be more diverse demographically.
Dr. Thomas, I'm going to have to interrupt you there. We can see the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, now making his way through this courthouse, this New York courthouse, for what is the first criminal trial of a former President of the United States. It's a long corridor now that he has to walk down. Let's listen in.
Nothing like this has been anything like it. Every legal scholar said case is nonsense. It should never have been brought. It doesn't deserve anything like this. There is no case, and they've said it. People that don't necessarily follow or like Donald Trump said this is an outrage that this case was brought. This is political persecution. This is a persecution like never before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. Again, it's a case that should have never been brought. It's an assault on America. And that's why I'm very proud to be here. This is an assault on our country. A country that's failing. A country that's run by an incompetent man who's very much involved in this case. This is really an attack on a political opponent. That's all it is. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you very much.
Donald Trump taking no questions. He said there is no case to answer. This is an assault on America, an outrage, a political prosecution. Yes. But curiously, that he was very proud to be here. Still with us is the founding director of the UCL Centre on US Politics, Dr. Thomas Grift. And Dr. Grift, that was a very strident statement there from Donald Trump.
It was, and it's more of the same for Donald Trump. He really is presenting himself as a martyr. I think it's notable that he articulated that he's proud to be here. He's honored to be here in this situation. And, much of the language that Trump uses is all about us and we. And he very much talks about his constituents in those terms, that he wants to ensure that Republican voters know that this isn't just an alleged assault on him, but that it's an alleged assault on everyone. And that really goes to his brand of grievance politics that has been so effective and has resonated so much with his base.
Absolutely. It's so interesting to see that Donald Trump says he's proud to be here. Again, that leads into that idea that perhaps underneath it all, he's quite enjoying it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You know, just from the sheer entertainment perspective, this is a reality TV star. It's someone who likes being in front of the cameras, who likes the attention being on him. I think that he is enjoying it. Whether he'll, you know, still enjoy it in week 3 or week 4 when he's sitting in a courtroom on a Thursday afternoon listening to, you know, details alleging that he did this or that, that's another question. But for now, it's really going to exploit this, leverage it for all it's worth. This will be a big distraction during the campaign, though, because he is going to be required to sit in the courtroom, unlike some of these civil trials that he has faced before. And so that may impinge on his campaign schedule.
Let's just have another little replay of what Donald Trump had to say. He made sure to make a political attack on Joe Biden. There he is.
Well, he's walking up to that barrier there. It's quite a long walk in a long corridor. Journalists very far away. But let's listen in.
Nothing like this has been anything like it. Every legal scholar said case is nonsense. It should never have been brought. It doesn't deserve anything like this. There is no case, and they've said it. People that don't necessarily follow or like Donald Trump, that this is an outrage that this case was brought. This is political persecution. This is a persecution like never before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. Again, it's a case that should have never been brought. It's an assault on America. And that's why I'm very proud to be here. This is an assault on our country. It's a country that's failing. It's a country that's run by an incompetent man who's very much involved in this case. This is really an attack on a political opponent. That's all it is. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you very much.
And there we go. That was Donald Trump, a quick statement as he goes into the court. Thomas, just to finish, and then we'll let you go. He clearly is setting up him versus a corrupt political justice system.
Republican primaries, framing himself as the victim, saying that he is on the receiving end of a political vendetta orchestrated by Democrats, the deep state, who he alleges does not believe in democracy. And so I think that this is very much a preview of what we can expect over the summer and heading into the fall. It's really a strong indicator of how Trump expects to run his campaign.
Well, Dr. Thomas Griff, the founding director of the UCL Centre on US Politics, really appreciate your time talking through a wide-ranging conversation there on the implications of what is a historic day in New York at that courthouse.
Wow. Let us know your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say. What did you make of Donald Trump's statement there? Very interesting indeed. But closer to home, we are moving on because the Rwanda bill is back in the Commons today, and we're joined by our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who is on Downing Street for us. Catherine, what is happening this afternoon?
Yes, so MPs back in Westminster today, and the Safety of Rwanda bill back in the House of Commons. There'll be about 7 votes over a couple of hours this evening. It's expected that all of the House of Lords amendments put forward before Easter will be voted down. The bill will then go to the House of Lords tomorrow. It will then come back to the Commons. We're expecting it to be done and dusted potentially by Thursday. That then clears the way at last for flights taking off to Rwanda. It is 2 years and 1 day since the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the then Home Secretary Priti Patel announced this scheme. They said if you cross the channel illegally, you would be sent on a one-way ticket to Rwanda. No exceptions. Well, it hasn't quite turned out like that yet, has it? But the government are still sticking to the line that they're going to get flights within weeks. I asked in the lobby briefing if the Prime Minister still meant the spring, which of course ends at the end of May. They wouldn't be drawn on that, but they are confident. We asked them too about exactly how they're going to get people there, given that a number of commercial airlines have been approached here in the UK, don't want to have anything to do with it. The same applies to Rwanda Airlines. The Prime Minister's spokesman said, oh, well, they're working on this. They deport people all the time and they have a range of options. So we shall see. But certainly it looks like finally this week the bill will pass into law. And of course, it's specifically designed to make sure that legal challenges cannot stop these flights from taking off. The government is confident, and let's face it, it does need a win, because we had that record number of migrants crossing the Channel in a single day this year. Yesterday, 534. And as Labour have pointed out, since 2018, there's been 120,000 people arrived illegally, a third of them on Rishi Sunak's watch. So the government dearly needs to get some flights off to Rwanda at long last.
Catherine, I should say we're looking at pictures now of the debate in the House of Commons. Home Secretary James Cleverly on his feet, answering points from across the House. But Catherine, perhaps what's new and has pricked up the ears of many people today is a leak, really, from the government suggesting that if Rwanda happens, if this bill passes, indeed if it passes this week, flights get off the ground, this is only the start of the big operation of this government to find places to send illegal migrants to. Also on the list to strike similar deals to this are Botswana, Costa Rica, many other countries. What can you tell us about the new deals the government is seeking?
Yes, that was reported in the Times this morning, and we asked the Prime Minister's spokesman specifically about that. He said, oh, well, these are based on old documents. I would guide you away from that. But then he went on to say, it shouldn't be a surprise. We are always in contact with international partners to tackle migration challenges. They went on to say, of course, it's not just us struggling with migration. The whole of Europe is. The numbers have gone through the roof in the last year or two, and other countries too are looking at processing these claims offshore. So certainly the reports in the Times, there was a whole long list of countries, some of which had been discounted, but those four that you mentioned, Tom, it sounds like if Rwanda gets up and running, potentially they might look to do deals with those countries to expand this even further. Of course, the hope is that when they start sending large numbers of people to Rwanda, people will simply think, actually, I'd rather stay in France.
Yes, and as we know, you mentioned Europe. They, of course, voted on a new migration asylum pact, which they hope will help with the whole immigration issue that, of course, as you say, is very much a global one. What happens next, then? If this bill is finally passed and the government sets it into legislation and we see it go through, I guess the hope is that flights will be pretty much immediate.
Well, a few weeks, I think. So it's looking like end of May, best case scenario, early June. They've got various bits to iron out, not least how they're going to physically get people there. But they are already selecting the first tranche of migrants that are going to go there. Although the Care for Calais charity, it's reported today too, are trying to get volunteers to basically help people that are selected for those flights to fight back, to mount legal challenges. Now, the government are confident that this is going to be legally watertight, that Rwanda is safe, that it won't be overturned by the courts. But some of these charities, of course, have got very, very different ideas.
Well, Catherine Forster, live from Downing Street. Really appreciate your time on this issue and indeed on what the government has been saying. But let's get to the root of why MPs are talking about this, why MPs are debating all of these Lord amendments right now. It's all about the migration that we're seeing across the Channel. And today, we've seen, at least yesterday's numbers, another record day. Let's get more with our Home and Security editor, Mark White.
Well, we've had an improvement, Tom, in the weather over the past couple of days, over the weekend there, from the stormy conditions that we saw last week. And that meant that 750, very close to 750 of these migrants came across the English Channel in 15 small boats, 214 in 5 small boats on Saturday, and then 534 came across on Sunday, a record daily total for the year so far, and that takes the number who have crossed the English Channel since the beginning of the year to more than 6,200, and that's almost 30% up on where we were at this point last year. And the importance about that figure is that, of course, last year the government was able to trumpet the fact that the numbers of people crossing the Channel had dropped by a third. They said that that was down in no small part to the stop the boats policy of this government. Well, they're not at the moment able to claim the same thing because there has been a total reversal. And the real worry for Rishi Sunak as this election year progresses is that we get much better weather conditions in the Channel as we head towards the summer, and we see very significant numbers coming across. If it is, as the summer progresses, still more crossing the English Channel than last year, it's going to be very difficult to go into an election and say that that policy is working.
And as you were telling us last week, this is getting more and more dangerous for the authorities and for the people smugglers and for those seeking to cross the Channel. Violent clashes becoming more commonplace.
Well, because it's a multi-million-pound business for these criminal gangs, and as hideous as they are in the work that they do, they have become very sophisticated in both reading the tide, the weather conditions out there, but also in their business operations, in the way that they source all the component parts for these small boats, and they get the migrants who sometimes are not in the camps in northern France but further inland, and then when it's their time to take that trip across the Channel, that illegal voyage, then they are shipped to northern France from these locations further inland. But our GB News Kent producer has been speaking to contacts of his on the other side of the Channel who have told him that thousands of people are already now gathering in northern France, waiting for the weather conditions to improve to get across the Channel to the UK, to claim asylum, to enter the system, and hopefully, from their point of view, not to be sent to Rwanda.
Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens with the passage of this bill and indeed what happens with those thousands now waiting to cross further. Mark White, thank you very much for bringing us the very latest on this enormous issue.
Yes, coming up, the UK government reportedly gave £240,000 in COVID funding to a pro-Iran Islamic centre. We'll have the details very shortly. Stay with us.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Good evening. Well, I thought it was an absolutely knockout front page of a Sun that went online last night and was on display all over the country today. Union joke, and there is. Well, you can just about make out that it's the Union flag, better known perhaps as the Union Jack, but they've decided to add pink and all sorts of colours to it, and that is on sale for fans going to the Olympics in France this year to buy and to wear, which led to a great big panic. What on earth would be on the shirts, shorts and kit of the athletes? Well, a statement did come out mid-morning from the British Olympic Association, which said all Team GB athletes will wear the Union Jack as normal in Paris. However, Team GB kit itself is expected to include different shades of blue or red as in previous years. Well, I'm sorry, I don't really buy that. Now, we sent Adam Cherry out to Wembley today to ask some members of the public how they felt about this.
This episode of Companies Fixing Things That Weren't Broken. We're going to be asking the people of London what they think of the changing colours of the Team GB Olympic logo. Take a look at this.
The blue, the red and the white, it's perfect. I feel like, you know, it shouldn't be that controversial, but, you know, it's iconic. I feel like the colours are iconic. Everyone's known London for being, you know, red, white and blue.
I feel like it doesn't really represent England like that.
The colours of the colours are kind of random.
I think it's very colourful. It's very pinkish and quite unicornish kind of thing, yeah.
A bit too unicornish for Team GB.
A little bit.
Disgusting. Well, we're British. Their colours are not pink and purple and...
like, some patterns on there, it's all going crazy.
That's not our flag. That don't represent me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just coming up to 10 minutes to 3. Now, an Islamic centre labelled the nerve centre of Iran in the UK is said to have received £240,000 in government COVID payments, despite having a reserve of over £4 million.
Yes, the payments were revealed by the think tank Policy Exchange, who had called for a ban on visas being issued for Iranian nationals to work at this very centre. The report said that all 4 of the directors of the centre since 1994 had been named as representatives in the UK for Iran's supreme leader, with the centre holding frequent events to mark the 1979 Islamic Revolution.
Really, really shocking stuff. But we can now speak to GB News reporter Charlie Peters for more on this story. And Charlie, it just beggars belief. Taxpayers' money was going to this.
Well, the Islamic Centre for England occupies a former cinema in Maida Vale, the leafy West London suburb. And in that building, it has hosted several events to commemorate the 1979 Islamic Revolution of Iran. And the stated aims of the charity are to promote the tenets and the values of Shia Islam. But at the same time, it does stand accused today of being a nerve centre for promoting the political and religious demands and desires of the Iranian regime. And this report from the think tank Policy Exchange has pointed in particular to an event in January 2020 after the assassination by then-President Donald Trump of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commander Qasem Soleimani. The general was struck by a drone in Baghdad in Iraq, and they reacted by describing him as a great martyr. That's what the director of this charity said at the time. Now, £240,000 of taxpayers' cash has arrived to the charity since. These were made during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2 separate payments, £109,000 as part of the furlough scheme job retention approach, and then another £120,000 in 2021. Of course, that scheme was rolled out very quickly by the Treasury to ensure that job losses were not significant, and there were not, as many critics have said, significant checks and balances conducted at the time. They just wanted to get the money out to keep those charities and those jobs safe. Now, the reaction has been pretty stark to those claims, at least in part because in 2022, the Charity Commission did eventually launch a statutory inquiry into that event in January 2020, when it did commemorate the death of Qasem Soleimani. Now, that is just a small part of this report from Policy Exchange, because it looks at a much wider set of concerns around how Tehran projects itself in Britain. And it points to this Islamic Centre for England as the nerve centre of a much wider informal nexus of groups that coalesce to promote the ideals of the regime.
And we know there have been many warnings from the police and counter-terrorism towards Iranian dissidents living in London and in other parts of the UK that they could be at heightened risk of kidnap and other threats.
That's right, and even some reporters from an Iran-linked TV channel in Britain have also faced several of those threats. In West London, we have seen armed police presence covering TV studios in that location. And one of the things that Policy Exchange has pointed out in its report today is that MI5, the security services, have not described their counter-subversion measures in great detail. It pointed to a previous statement on the security services website saying that they no longer conduct counter-subversion activities. This is one of the roles and responsibilities of the security services. They deal in espionage and dealing with terror threats, but also subversion, the more menacing undercurrent to destabilise a wider society. This was a popular strategy for the security services during the Cold War when Russian subversion was key. And I think what many of the analysts involved in this Policy Exchange report are pointing out today is that a new threat has arisen. It's almost snuck into Britain through many of these groups and is now, they claim, coalescing and acting again to push forward pro-Iranian messages.
Hugely shocking story, and couldn't be more timely given what is going on now between Iran and the rest of the Middle East and indeed the United Kingdom. But Charlie Peters, thank you very much for bringing us all the details.
Yes, as if you didn't have enough to worry about. Thank you very much indeed, Charlie Peters. That's it from us today. Thank you for tuning in.
Show, lots of live events, but don't worry, Martin Daubney is up next. He joins us now. And Martin, I'm sure there's lots more to come with you.
Yeah, cracking show, guys, as ever. Yeah, in around about 30 minutes' time, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will address the Commons on the escalating tensions in Israel, between Israel and Iran. We're also going to cross live to see Keir Starmer's response to that as we face down the barrel of all-out war in the Middle East. Rwanda, once again, it's ping-pong time in the Commons. Will a single flight ever get off the ground? 500 people arrived via small boats yesterday. And 10 years on since smart motorways were introduced, the RAC and the campaigner whose husband was killed wants them banned. That's all on my show. But first, it's time for your latest weather forecast.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, welcome to the Met Office weather forecast. It's going to be a blustery afternoon with further heavy showers coming through. They do ease later on with the chance of clear spells developing overnight, but generally low pressure is in charge of our forecast for the rest of the day. Low pressure sitting in the North Sea, bringing a gusty and cold northwesterly wind with it. These showers are going to be lively where they occur. Hail and thunder a possibility, but they do tend to ease overnight with clear spells developing. The showers becoming more confined to eastern parts along with the gusty wind, and with plenty of clear spells towards western and northwestern parts, temperatures will dip into the mid-single figures, perhaps a bit lower in one or two shelter spots. So a touch of ground frost here and there as we begin Tuesday, but otherwise plenty of bright weather first thing. Still be some cloud and showers along the east coast, and further showers will bubble up as the day gets going elsewhere. But there'll be fewer showers and there'll be more sunshine compared with today, with temperatures responding a little better. 14, perhaps 15 in the south, 11 or 12 further north, and with lighter winds feeling more pleasant. Wednesday starts off with a frost in places, clear spells first thing. Plenty of sunshine through the morning though, although there will be some cloudier skies returning to Northern Ireland later and a few showers elsewhere. All in all, it's looking like an improved picture as we end the week. Higher pressure, drier weather.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Don't miss your chance to win our biggest prize so far. There's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task. This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. With an upcoming election looming over West